Om Mahamaye Jagannatah Kalike Ghora Dakshine Grihana Vandanam Devi Namaste Parameshwari. Om, salutations to that cosmic confoundress, the great sorceress Mahamayi. Salutations to that goddess who is the mother of the whole world, the Jagannatha. That awe-inspiring, terrific Kali, Kalike Ghora Dakshine. Please accept this prayer, Grihana Vandanam Devi, you who are the ruler of the universe. Namaste Parameshwari. Om Grihana Vandanam Mataha Sada Vijaya Vardhini Pada Padmam Sada Vande Sthanam Dehi Padambuje. Please accept this prayer, O Mother, you who are always victorious. Sada Vijaya Vardhini. I pray always to thy lotus feet, Pada Padmam. Please keep me at thy lotus feet forever. Om Shrimatsura Radhya Charanamburu Hadvayam Chara Chara Jagadhatrim Kalikam Pranamamyaham. I bow to you, Kali, who are present in the moving and unmoving, you who are the holder of the entire universe, Jagadhatri Devi. Om, salutations to that Kali worshipped by gods and demons alike. May this be an offering to thy lotus feet. Om Namah Shivaya Shantaya Karanatraya Hetave Nivedayami Chatmanam Gatistvam Parameshwara. Om Avantikayam Vihitavataram Mukti Pradhanaya Sajananam Akala Mrityo Parirakshanaartam Vande Mahakala Mahasuresham Vande Mahakala Mahasuresham. Salutations to Bhairava. Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharma swarupine Avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Om Shanti 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 Om Gling Yesu Christamadi Sarvataribhyo namaha. Yesu Christamarpanamastu. Om, salutations to the Avatara, who from time to time incarnates in historicity as a human being in order to establish the Dharma, to restore what was old and to introduce something new. Salutations to that Avatar, that incarnation of incarnations. May this be an offering at his lotus feet. Purity incarnate, love embodied. Om, peace, peace, peace. Mere Putra Yesu Christaya Namaha. Jaima. So the reason why I thought it would be nice to do a bit of a Manasa Puja, it would be nice to worship, Ganesh and then Shiva and Surya, Jaya Durga, to worship Agni and Narayana along with Lakshmi and Saraswati, to worship the 9 planets, the 10 forms of Kali, the 8 forms of Bhairava, the 10 forms of Dasha Dikpalas, the 10 directional deities, Indra Adi Dasha Dikpala, and then of course also worshipping their weapons, Vajra Shakti, Danda Shakti, Kadaga Shakti, like that, and then worshipping Ganesh and the Kshetrapala Bhairavs and the Batuka Bhairavs and the Yoginis and all of that, and most of all, of course, worshipping Sri Ramakrishna, Sarada Devi, Vivekananda, Brahmananda, Yogananda. The reason I wanted to worship all of these, and especially worship Kali, is because tonight we're going to be talking about something that is so spiritually exalted, that I don't really even dare speak of it at all. So I thought we should call in our gurus, and I thought it would be nice to think about our guru and to think about our lineage, to contemplate the Vedas. And I thought it would be nice to chant some Vedic hymns, not just from the Sri Rudram, which we tend to chant quite a bit, but we also chanted Sahasra, Shirsha, Purusha, Sahasraksha, Sahasrapath. Beautiful hymns, hymns that are so ancient, so powerful, that to chant them, to even think them, to even remember them, immediately purifies body, speech, and mind. And it requires intense spiritual purity and a very exalted spiritual state to discuss what we're going to discuss tonight. So we can only pray that we can do it some justice. Obviously, we can't. This is an inscrutable topic, but I hope to discuss the Sermon on the Mount. It's the creme de la creme of spiritual teaching. It's the Christ's transmission. In several places, it's recorded. In the book of Matthew, of course, that's the Sermon on the Mount proper. But also in the book of Luke, we find in that gospel also there's like a sermon on the plain. And it seems like these might have been the same thing. Some scholars say, oh, Luke's testimony of the Sermon of the Plain is Matthew's testimony of the Sermon of the Mount. And they both have different ideas about what they heard. After all, if somebody gives a lecture And if you take notes afterwards, when you compare notes, you'll see that you heard different things, which is really exciting to me. The idea is that we each hear exactly what we need to hear or rather we mishear what we hear at the time when we need to hear slash mishear it. So the Christ teaches, and then here we are trying our best to interpret what he says based on our own limited spiritual understanding, based on our own projections and whatnot. So arguably, even these highly accomplished disciples, these apostles, Matthew and Luke and whatnot, they were there, and obviously they're going to have a different idea about what the Christ said at that time. So they have different accounts. So in one sense, the Sermon on the Plain, as we find in the Gospel of Luke, and the Sermon on the Mount, never mind that these are two geographically different places, are perhaps the same sermon. And so Matthew is recording it one way, Luke is recording it another way. But according to another view, which I'm quite partial to, these are two different sermons. Like the Sermon on the Plain is a talk that the Christ gave to a group. He had a satsang there, and Luke recorded it there. And then the Sermon on the Mount is another prayer that he did at a different satsang in a different place. But the thing is, a master like this usually speaks about the same things in slightly different ways to different audiences. So he arguably spoke about the same themes quite consistently, and these themes are of course present both in the Sermon on the Mount and also in the Sermon on the Plain, as per Matthew's testimony and also Luke's testimony. Having said that though, this sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, is perhaps the Christ's finest teaching, or it's like the TLDR of the whole Christ Leela, and it's a very, very exquisite piece of spiritual literature. So let me say a few things about it first. The Bhagavad Gita is very important because the Upanishads are so profound, but to make the Upanishads practicable, to essentialize the Upanishads, and to harmonize the various Upanishadic traditions which were present at that time, Sri Krishna incarnated. So you could say the incarnation of Sri Krishna is very important because historically speaking, whether or not you accept Krishna as somebody who actually existed in his historicity or not, that's beside the point. But historically speaking, he might have been the first incarnation, mythological or actual, to try to harmonize all the various traditions of his time and place. So like in the Krishna world, you find traditions like the Vedic tradition, which has two forms. There's the Uttara Mimamsa tradition, which is the Upanishadic, philosophical, Gnostic form of the Vedic tradition. But you also have the Karma Kanda, the ritualistic form, which is otherwise known as the Purva Mimamsa, or the ancient reading of the Vedas. So these are two competing schools. Uttara Mimamsa generally rejects Purva Mimamsa because it emphasizes philosophy, jnana, over ritual action, karma. And the converse is true for the Purva Mimamsaka. So the Purva Mimamsaka will reject the Uttara Mimamsaka on the basis of emphasizing ritual over philosophy. So the Vedas give us these two things: the Karma Kanda, the ritual portion, and the Jnana Kanda, the philosophical portion. The Vedas proper with the Samhitas and with the Brahmanas and whatnot, and the Upanishads, which are like the Aranyakas and the Gnostic teachings of the Upanishads. And the two of these can be emphasized differently by different groups. So these are two competing groups: the Vedic exegetes who preferred ritual and the Vedic exegetes who preferred Gnostic contemplations. So the Purva Mimamsakas and the Uttara Mimamsakas. The Uttara Mimamsaka school later gets called Vedanta. So there are Vedantists, and there are, of course, ritualists, Vedic ritualists, and they're competing with one another. To make matters slightly more interesting, for the plot, you could say, there are also other competing schools, like Sankhya and like Yoga. So Sankhya has its own theology, its own metaphysic. Actually, not a theology, since Sankhya tends to be Nir Ishvara Sankhya Vada, tends to be mostly non-theistic. So that non-theistic, realist, dualist school known as Sankhya was also one of the pieces on the chessboard, if you will. And so Sankhya was competing with Vedic ritualism and Vedic Gnostic contemplation, though it too was drawn from Vedic understanding. So there's the Sankhyan school, and then there's Yoga. Yoga is like a sister school of Sankhya. It shares a lot of things with Sankhya, but it has God as the Adi Yogi, as the primordial teacher. So it has a theism of sorts. It's a kind of theology, whereas Sankhya is a non-theistic metaphysic, if you will. So there's Sankhya, there's yoga, there's Vedic ritualism, there's Vedic Gnostic contemplation. All of that is going on at the time, and there's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of debate. So one theme that you find in the Bhagavad Gita is this strong emphasis on the harmony of all the different traditions. So you see Sri Krishna is there saying, like, Sankhya and Yoga are not really different. And then he's trying to synthesize Vedanta, not only to make it practical, but to also harmonize the various competing schools that are there at his time. So Sri Krishna, historically speaking, the debate about his historicity aside, historically speaking, Sri Krishna as an Avatara, as he tells us in chapter 4, verse 7, Yada Yada Hi Dharmasya, is specifically to address the religious plurality of his time and to try to establish some kind of harmony there. So he does that. But he also tries his best to make the teachings immediately practicable, not just for the rishis seated in meditation deep in the mountain caves or in the forest, also for them, no doubt, but also for people who are actively participating in the day-to-day life of being in the world, if you will. So to be in the world and not to be of it, to be engaging with the world but to not become worldly. It's a really profound teaching, this karma yoga teaching that we get in the Bhagavad Gita. So what we find in the Bhagavad Gita is an attempt to explain what is there before, like the teachings that we find in the Upanishads, as well as an attempt to introduce that teaching in a new way that fits the needs of that time. So that's the role of the Avatara, not to break the law, but to fulfill it, to come and restore and rejuvenate the spiritual tradition that preceded him/her, and also, importantly, to offer something new that is like kind of like the re-up of Molly at the rave or something. You know, when the first dose kind of wears off, then you re-up. The Avatara is like God's re-up, if you will. So she comes and she reinvigorates us with some new teaching that is practicable for the people of that time, given their cultural, but also, I guess you could say, can I say yogic? Is that a word? Yogic disposition, as per that yuga, as per that particular time, space, climate. Okay, so Sri Krishna is the first person to do that. And in the Bhagavad Gita, what we get is an essentialized teaching of the tradition known as the Upanishads and the Vedas and whatnot. So the Bhagavad Gita is very important. And we often argue that if the Vedas are like cows, then Sri Krishna, the cowherd, was able to get the milk, to be able to extract the essence from the cow's udder. And so what the Bhagavad Gita is, it's a tall, healthy glass of milk. See, the cow is great and all, but if you don't know how to milk the cow, you won't get the milk. Krishna, lucky for us, is a gopa, a cowherd boy. So he knows just how to milk the cows of the Vedas. And what he gives us is the finished product, if you will, the milk, which we can drink and be nourished by. So Sri Krishna is very important because as an avatara, he essentializes the vast universe of spirituality in which he finds himself, and he offers it in a practicable way for each and every one of us to be nourished thereby. Okay, that's Sri Krishna. Then before Sri Krishna was Sri Rama. That's another interesting example. Rama himself never really taught anything. He wasn't like, a yogi seated in a meditation seat, like offering satsangs or anything like that. He was a prince, and as a prince, he lived a princely life in the royal palace, killing demons and doing whatever it is that princes do at that time. And then when he was exiled, his job was just to demonstrate dharma. He didn't necessarily go around teaching this or teaching that. However, there is a teaching that we find in texts like the Tulsidas Charitmanas. The Ram Charitmanas offers this beautiful teaching from Sri Rama to Shabari, this tribal woman who has been waiting for Sri Rama her whole life. And finally, one day, Sri Rama comes. And there's a beautiful line in the Bible, make way in the wilderness for the coming of the Lord. Like that, Shabari every single day was actively making way in the wilderness. Literally, she lived in the jungle. And every day she would make a way for Rama to come and see her. It's such a touching story. She was told by her guru, who was kind of like her adopted dad, that Sri Rama would one day visit the ashram. So because her dad told her this, Shabari, who you can think is a kind of prototypical Matangi actually, since her father's name was Matanga. Anyway, we don't need to get into that now. Matangi Jayanti is after all coming up. And so I'll talk about this more then. So April 30th, that's Matangi Jayanti. So I'll definitely bring up Shabari and talk about all of that at that occasion. But for now, it's enough to note that Matanga's adopted daughter, Shabari, was told at a young age that Sri Rama would one day come unannounced. See, this is before Instagram, so it's not like Sri Rama can send her a DM or post a story and tell her when she's going to be when he's going to come. She has no way of contacting him, and he could just show up anytime for any reason. So she has to always be ready. So she's each and every day waking up early, making her morning ablutions in the river nearby, and then painstakingly preparing a pathway for Sri Rama. So she actually goes and plucks these flowers and then plucks the flower petals and makes a path with flower petals for Sri Rama, thinking that, he's God himself, so his feet are so pure and therefore so delicate. It would be a tragedy if he had to walk on the rough, stony ground in order to reach her. So she worked really hard to make sure his pathway was cushioned with flower petals, with fragrant, soft petals, so that, she could have him show up one day. So she's doing this every single day for years and years and years and years. For her whole life, she's making a way in the wilderness for the coming of the Lord. It's so beautiful, so profound. And one day, the Lord actually does come to her in the wilderness. And he offers a teaching, a beautiful teaching about purity and impurity and how sincerity of bhakti overcomes all these ritualistic rules and whatnot. It's a beautiful transmission of pure bhakti. And there we see what Rama says to Shabari in that particular scene is pretty much one-to-one what Krishna says to Arjuna. See, Krishna is also not like a big guru type. He's not like a Brahmin seated in a meditation seat in some cave doing satsang. He too is a prince. He's a king. And he does what princes do, I guess, like fight demons and live the dharma and whatnot. But a certain time came when his best friend Arjuna required some consoling. And so Arjuna drops his bow. He doesn't want to fight the war, and that prompts Sri Krishna to take on the role of a guru. Now, he's always advising his friends. He goes to Duryodhana and he tells him, don't do this, brother. He's talking to Arjuna. Like, he plays the role of the advisor quite often, but he doesn't act like a guru type. He doesn't have a big beard seated on some asan. Like he's not a Brahmin. He's a Kshatriya, meaning his life is a life of intense activity, ruling, fighting, that kind of thing, shooting bows and governing a kingdom, that kind of thing. But in this particular instance, because Sri Arjuna needed a teaching, Sri Krishna steps up and becomes the guru, and he transmits this essence of the Upanishads. So the essence of religion was given by Rama to Shabari. That same essence was given by Sri Krishna to Arjuna. And this has started the lineage of transmission. And that same teaching is being transmitted over and over and over again. Now, after Sri Krishna would come Sri Buddha. And importantly, Buddha does the exact same thing. He comes not to destroy, but to fulfill. Somebody once said to me, the Buddha gave Hinduism a middle finger because allegedly the Buddha denied the Vedas, he denied God, and of course he denied the eternal soul, which are all three things that are very sacred to quote unquote Sanatana Dharma. So if we don't have the Vedas, then what do we have? If we don't have God, if we don't have the eternal soul, then in what sense are we still Sanatana Dharma? In no sense. Arguably, all the schools of Sanatana Dharma, Nyaya, Vaishashika, Sankhya, Yoga, Purva Mimamsa, Uttara Mimamsa, the various forms of Tantra, like all these various schools that we find in Sanatana Dharma, which you might call schools of Hinduism, they all disagree about what God is. They all disagree about what the self is, and they all have disagreements about what the Vedas actually say. But they will all, each and every one of them, accept the self, accept God, and accept the Vedas. So by rejecting all three of these things, has not the Buddha stepped outside of the stream? Has he not gone rogue and become a heterodox tradition? Not so. It wasn't until much later, hundreds of years after the Buddha, that Buddhism would be seen as a standalone school. This is a very important point, fam. In the 700 ADs, this is very important. In 700 AD, Buddhism was still seen as a school of Sanatana Dharma along with Jainism. These days, when we define Hinduism, we define it as all those various traditions that accept the Vedas, that accept the eternal self, and that accept God. So therefore, Buddhism and Jainism, by rejecting the eternal God, the eternal soul, and the Vedas. Both of them are, of course, non-theistic traditions. By rejecting these things, they are therefore not Hindu. So in India, there's Hinduism, but there's also these heterodox traditions like Jainism and like Buddhism, and also more in a more modern sense, Sikhism and the Brahma Kumaris. These are also traditions that developed in India in the medieval period, and they also rejected the Vedas. Sikhism in favor of the Guru Granth Sahib and whatnot. So they stepped away from the Vedas, although their practice is pretty much one-to-one dharmic in that it references the Vedas, even though it rejects it as an authority. Okay, so having said all of that, we have, yeah, and of course, Charvakas and whatnot, but nobody has to take them seriously. No, sometimes we do just for fun. But the Buddhists, the Jains, the Charvakas is interesting. They're more like satirists than anything. There's one Charvaka joke that I like. They offer it as an argument, but obviously when you look at Charvaka work, it doesn't seem like they're very seriously trying to establish. I mean, they are, but it just doesn't kind of hold up to the philosophical standard of India. But there's one joke I like. The Charvakas say they're trying to dissuade people from practicing Vedic sacrifices because all of that is so superstitious, right? Charvakas, by the way, are like atheists or materialists. See, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Stephen Fry, all those guys are pretty late to the party. We've been in India Richard Dawkinsing and Christopher Hitchensing since like the dawn of our civilization. Yeah, and still those arguments have not really held much water. But there is one joke I like. So the Charvakas, they don't like Vedic ritualism. And that's something they actually kind of share in common with a lot of other spiritual traditions in India also. So everybody likes to bully Vedic ritualists, sadly. So anyway, the Charvakas say, so here's the logic of your ritual. There's this fire god named Agni. Okay, fine. Let's say I accept that. And he has a Shakti named Swaha. And so you offer some ghee into the fire and invoke Agni, the messenger of the gods, to take that ghee over to the heavenly realm. And you're doing this because you want your father to also be able to attain the heavenly realm. Correct? And the Vedic ritualist will say, yeah, more or less. We offer the fire, we invoked various deities, and the fire takes the ghee and transports it to the deities. Good. And we're doing it because we want our forefathers to attain the Pitri Loka or something. Okay, very good. So then the Charvaka asks the second question. So everything you offer to the fire immediately goes to the gods? And they say, yes, that's the purpose of Agni. Agni is the messenger of the gods. So then the Charvaka says, might as well just throw your father in there now then. Why offer all this ghee, go through all these mantras? If the fire takes you straight to God, just take your father now and throw him in there. It's a pretty, I kind of like it. Anyway, so the point here, though, the point of all of this is that Buddhism and Jainism were actually in the 700 AD, not considered to be heterodox traditions. And this is because there are certain texts. They're called Shad Darshana Sangrahas. So these texts are by great, I mean, like historians or academics, I guess. I don't necessarily mean to imply that they were spiritual masters, but they were definitely spiritual and definitely interested in documenting quite broadly the spiritual traditions that were present in India at the time. So Haribhadra Suri was one such person, and in his Shad Darshana Sangraha, we find actually interestingly Jainism and Buddhism listed alongside Vaisheshika, Nyaya, and some other schools as Hindu schools. Very interestingly. The word Hinduism, of course, hadn't yet been coined back then. But Buddhism and Jainism were not seen as heterodox. They were just seen as other schools. And then also Gunasuri, another person coming after Haribhadra Suri, also lists Buddhism and Jainism. But that's an interesting point, actually, that until recently, Buddhism was not really seen as different from Hinduism. In fact, when we look closely at what the Buddha is saying, he's quoting Upanishads almost word for word. Even the idea of like mindfulness, like that idea is in the Katha Upanishad very early on when we talk about the correct way of meditating is correct mindfulness and whatnot. So it's easy to point out that Buddhism is essentially the core teaching of the Upanishad. And when we look at the Upanishad, we might find actually more or less something quite non-theistic, something that does reject the Vedic Karma Kanda, something that does actually dethrone God in favor of some absolute reality called Sat Chit Ananda. So what the Upanishads are teaching comes I was going to say comes very close to what the Buddha is teaching, but I think I'll make a stronger statement, is one to one what the Buddha is teaching. That's a hill I will happily die on. Obviously, it's not what Hindus will agree on and on Buddhists will agree on. What Buddhists say and what Buddha said are different things. And what Hindus say and what Shankara said are different things. But more or less, the reason why Shankara and Gaudapada are accused of being crypto-Buddhist is probably because the Buddhist is the Buddhist doctrine is the Upanishadic doctrine, which is almost one to one what Advaita Vedanta wants to say too. So Advaita Vedanta, Buddhism, these are very importantly also teachings of Dharma. And they were very important in that climate, in that context, because at that time there was too much superstition, too much dependence on grace. People were sitting around doing nothing. You know, the lazy Christian says, this is Swami Prabhavanandaji's phrase, the lazy Christian will say, oh, you know, I went to church on Sunday this week, so I don't need to do anything else. It's like in that movie Spring Breakers. No, not in the movie Spring Breakers, another Harmony Korine movie. Beach Bum. Zac Efron plays this character who like doesn't mind robbing people because the Christ already paid for this, man. He's like, no, we're fine. We can do whatever we want. The Christ already paid for this. In a sense, he's not theologically wrong, but you know, the idea that like, oh, I'll be saved just because I intellectually profess to accept the Christ. I don't have to do anything that he told me to do. I don't have to actually walk like him or like follow him or enter the narrow gate. It's enough that I intellectually assent to it. Therefore, I'll be saved. So that kind of thing, Swami Prabhavanandaji calls out as like lazy Christianity. Then there's also lazy Hinduism, which is like, oh, you know, at some point it will happen for me, not in this incarnation, but in some future incarnation, I shall realize God. Like that attitude that it's going to happen at some other time. Hey, repent. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. That idea, you know, like the kingdom has come and it's here now, and that we should realize God in this very life and not wait one moment more. We should not dilly-dally. That idea, the Buddha really championed, you know. So by getting rid of the priestcraft, which was very much attached to Vedic ritualism, by getting rid of the dependence to God, not necessarily God, but this idea that God will come and save me, by getting rid of that, and by getting rid of the idea of like the eternal soul that we just take for granted, which can always lead to some kind of complacency, the Buddha said, here and now, analyze and use your own self-effort and realize the truth. That's the idea. So self-effort over grace. So the Buddha is not contradicting, I think, the Upanishads. And so what the Buddha calls shunyata is a pedagogical tool to realize purnahangta, to use the Sanskrit phrase there, for the supreme fullness of the self. But of course, the semantics we can argue from century to century. And that's not that important for today's lecture. And that's not the purpose of today's gathering. But I just wanted to point out that the Buddha does exactly what Krishna does exactly what Rama does. He restores the dharma, but he comes not to break or to destroy, but to fulfill. In other words, he's God's Molly re-up at the rave, like I said earlier. He comes and he teaches exactly what we need to hear at that particular time. Now that gets updated because when we study Indian history, we see that hundreds of years after the Buddha, there's a kind of decline in India of Buddhism. You have really degenerate practices like King Ashoka conscripting individuals to become monks. I mean, what do they know of life? How can they renounce the world having never tasted the world? But King Ashoka's regime, the world's first pacifist constitution, actually, to his credit, but that Buddhist regime was quite problematic because he would take young boys out of homes and force them to become monks in the name of the Dharma. So Buddhism very much generated in India. And of course, when we come and interact with Buddhism, we're not interacting with it as Indians. We're interacting with it as secular, atheist, Western practitioners scarred by Catholic Christianity. So we drink the heady wine of supposed Buddhism, mindfulness-based stress reduction. That's good and all. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying it's not quite what Buddha had in mind. And not only that, it fails to address Buddha's message and how it developed in India. I mean, that's why there's virtually no Buddhism in India today. It just didn't really work there because it was misinterpreted and misused. So there was this cultural decline. And arguably, Shankara, as the Avatara, now comes to teach exactly what the Buddha taught, but now to root it into the Vedas and to the Upanishads and to resuscitate what maybe was lost or at least glossed over during the Buddhist heyday in India. So Shankara teaching the same thing. In fact, people accuse him of teaching the same thing. They call him a crypto madhyamika or something. But what he teaches in a way that's more appropriate for that particular cultural context. Okay, so that happens. And then after poor Shankara, he does his best. Now everybody likes to bully Shankara. Probably because this is the pendulum swinging hard the other way. It's because people have revered and venerated Shankara so much. He's like the ultimate, like there's no more spiritual prestige in India than Sri Shankara. Right, so there's Shankara, but then now people are starting to like kind of criticize Shankara. So after Shankara comes Ramanuja and Madhava and all these great philosophers that are reinterpreting Shankara. Now we can say Chaitanya is another Avatara who brings the message back to bhakti. He's a great logician and a master of Vedanta, right? But he brings the focus back to bhakti, to pure love for God. And that's also God addressing the need of that particular time. Because remember, Chaitanya grew up in the atmosphere of great scholars. In other words, he grew up amongst philosophers. And at that time, India was under the tyranny of the learned, if you will, to use Swami Vivekananda's phrase. It was a philosopher's India, and that's all really good. But we became lost in scriptural arguments and debates and whatnot, Buddhist versus Advaita Vedantins. And it was all very, just today we were teaching some logic at the middle school. And it was very sweet. One of our students was like, see, we're making syllogisms. And one student was like, lions are aggressive. Cats are aggressive. Therefore, cats are lions. I was like, no. If all aggressive things are lions, and if cats are aggressive, therefore only is a cat a lion. Like, so we were trying to like just kind of this hair-splitting discussion about why that syllogism doesn't work, but this one does. And then the whole thing just devolved. And I was like, okay, let's make nonsense syllogisms now. All marker pens are neon. All animals are no, this is my favorite one. Time flies when you're having fun. If a thing flies, it is therefore a bird. Therefore, the presence of fun transforms time into a bird. Stuff like that. We were having a lot of fun with it. And we were just seeing how, like, it's not just the AI that hallucinates facts, it's our mind. Like, we hear an argument and we just hallucinate that it's logically true or that it might be valid and sound at the same time, even though we don't really understand how logic works. The thing to remember is that Chaitanya was no fool. He was a master logician. In his time, his town, Navadvip, was like the center of Indian logic, Navya Nyaya, and great scholars in Benares, which was the seat of Indian learning at that time and probably also today, they came to Navadvip to learn Navya Nyaya. Even Buddhist philosophers, believe it or not, came and studied there, Navadvip, to learn this kind of logic. It's a very interesting idea. So Sri Chaitanya grew up in this philosophical environment of, and he just realized that ain't it, sis. And so he came not to destroy, but to fulfill. And so what Shankara taught, and by the way, there's a very telling story, once he goes to Puri and he walks all the way there because this is before Uber or before trains or anything. He walks all the way to Puri from Navadvip. And when he gets there, he just like runs into the temple and he tries to hug the statue of Lord Jagannath. But of course, that's not appropriate, especially if you're like covered in sweat, having run all the way. Like it's not appropriate to just jump on the dais and try to hug the deity. There are all these purity rules, in an Indian temple. So of course, the priests start to like attack him. They start to clobber him. But a great scholar who was at that time staying at Puri, recognized him from when he was back there in Navadvip. So he took him under his wing and he tried to teach him Vedanta, actually. He even said, he's like, oh, you have good qualities. I think you would be a good Vedantist. Let me teach you the Brahma Sutra along with Shankara's commentary. I'll teach you Vedanta along with Shankara's commentary. Will you consent to this instruction? And Chaitanya is full of humility. He's just like, yeah, okay. I'll take your class. And so every morning after their bath in the Ganga, this great master would sit with Sri Chaitanya, and teach the Brahma Sutras and give Shankara's commentary and also give his own commentary. And he saw that Chaitanya was like kind of inert, sitting there. He was looking kind of bored, not that impressed. And so this kind of pissed off the guru, whose ego is rather inflated. You know, that can happen to scholars and intellectuals and whatnot. They're always like, because I can articulate a sentence well, and because I can type a nice Reddit post, I'm obviously better. You know, that's the danger of Buddhism and Kashmir Shaivism. It's very dangerous because it's very heady and intellectual. So it tends to attract a lot of nerds and geeks who don't really get past their reading. They don't get their toes wet. They don't enter into the mandala. They don't feel the joy in the heart and in the loins, arguably, of what they're talking about. But they do feel a thrill in their mind, which is nice also. Still, it's not the real thing. So people who study Kashmir Shaivism, Trika philosophy, Advaita Vedanta, Buddhism, they can be like all up here and just see the way they interact with bhaktas and with the rest of the world. They act as if they're so superior because they are able to string a few words together and because they know this world is Maya and it's all Nama Rupa. But when you study their actual lives, it doesn't seem that there's that much more joy in that life than in like the day-to-day life of anyone else in the world. It's not that spiritually nourishing, although it can be very intellectually rewarding. And not to knock that, that's still quite valuable and good to use your faculties like that. Might as well think about God if you're going to think, right? In any case, this was the attitude of this particular Pandit, probably. He was a good person. These are all sincere people, but they get lost in the jungle or the net, the Shastra Jala, if you will, the net of scripture and thinking, and it's all up here, you know. And so Chaitanya is bored, and then he gets scolded. The guru is like, "What? Are you a fool? You don't understand any of this stuff?" When you teach someone, you want to see them like, "Oh, Guruji, Panditji, very good." Like you want to see some reaction. You know, you can't just like talk to a wall. And so Chaitanya naturally was not giving him anything to go off of. So he scolded him. And he was like, "Hey, are you bored? Like, are you dumb? Do you just not understand this stuff?" And Chaitanya's response is stunning. He said, "What the Brahma Sutra says, I understand. What Shankara says, I understand. What you say, I don't understand." You know, is that beautiful? Like the idea that like Buddha might come and listen to some Buddhist talking and he'll be like, "What are you guys on about?" Or the Christ comes back and he's like, "That's what you thought I was saying? Hate the gays? That's what you got from my Sermon on the Mount?" You know, like these great masters, Shankara, Buddha, Chaitanya, Krishna, when Sri Krishna comes and sees all these ISKCON people bashing everyone else for not like following the supreme personality of the Godhead, he'll be like, "Hare, in the Bhagavad Gita, I tried my best to harmonize all these traditions, and now you've created a great mess of things and putting this up here and putting that down there, and Vaikuntha Loka is so low, and this is like the Tanubha, the external peripheral glory. Like I came to harmonize, and you've come to create a sect." Like Krishna might be appalled at the way his name is used in a sectarian way. Buddha might be appalled to see all these people talking and talking and talking and not meditating. Shankara might be appalled to see his philosophy used to create condescension. Shankara himself said, "Beware, the Shastras are like a jungle. It's easy to get lost and to get bewildered." And he himself said the intellectual thrill of doing philosophy is not the same as spiritual nourishment. He himself warned us. So Shankara might be appalled to see his philosophy falling into the hands of nerds and geeks, the tyranny of the learned. And so Chaitanya comes and he says, "Look, what Brahma Sutra is saying, I get it. I have no problem. What Shankara is saying, I also understand." Because he was speaking the truth. "But what you are saying, you've made a great mess of things. I don't understand it." And this guy was about to get angry when Chaitanya started to give a discourse. And when Chaitanya gave a discourse, it cleared up all this person's doubts. Remember, this person is sincere. He's trying to realize God. He just drank the heady wine of intellectualism of his time, you know, and so he lost the flavor, the joy of things. But when he heard Sri Chaitanya give his discourse, he was so overwhelmed because he heard the truth, as it were. He found what he was looking for and what he vainly thought that he had realized but hadn't actually. And then he had a vision of Sri Chaitanya with Rama's bow and Rama's arrows, with Krishna's flute, and also with the kamandalu and the staff. So these are the six-armed Chaitanya, you know. Chaitanya, the present incarnation of Vishnu, and the previous incarnations are also included. Krishna with the flute and Rama with the bow and arrow. And when he saw this, he became a lifelong devotee and whatnot. So we have stories like this. The reason I bring all of this up now in the beginning of this lecture is to make this point. The Avatara's job is to give us a practicable version of all that came before him slash her, all that is there presently with him, and all that will come after. So it really is the creme de la creme teaching. Not only because it's practicable and immediately applicable, but because it is the essence and the truth, which we from time to time forget and mangle and misunderstand. So that's why I'm very scared about talking about the Sermon on the Mount, because it's just so awesome. And I don't feel like at all worthy to represent it in any way. What can we really understand of it? We're only going to understand it based on our own limited spiritual proclivities. So forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I'm going to try my best to talk about the Sermon on the Mount, but I already want to offer you the disclaimer that it will never come close to what the Christ. I mean, we'll never like obviously, but it'll. I don't think we can do it any justice at all. But we'll just out of devotion and out of love, in order to contemplate the Christ, we'll try. I'm doing this for three reasons. One, because like I said, it's one of the finest pieces of spiritual literature ever. The Bhagavad Gita, as you know, is the essence of the Upanishads. And the Upanishads are the essence of Sanatana Dharma, which doesn't mean Hinduism, it means spirituality. And so the Bhagavad Gita is an essential spiritual transmission. That's the first thing to point out. So what the Bhagavad Gita is to spirituality, of course, the New Testament, especially the Sermon of the Mount, is to spirituality also. It's the absolute essentialized practicable teaching. That's one reason why I want to do it, because it's an excellent piece of spiritual literature, very nourishing and good to return to time and time again. The other reason why I'm doing it is because today Pope Francis kicked the mortal coil triumphantly. It's a moment of great celebration. So I want this to be a tribute to Pope Francis, who was such a wonderful light in the tradition. So may this be an offering to him. And thirdly, the reason I want to do this is because it's obviously very important in our lineage. We look upon Sri Ramakrishna as the present day incarnation of the one who was Rama, of the one who was Krishna, of the one who was Buddha, of the one who was Shankara, of the one who was Chaitanya, and of the one who was Jesus Christ, who came not to break the law but to fulfill it. So obviously in our lineage, we look upon Sri Ramakrishna the way Christ would look upon Jesus, except unlike Christians who are usually regarding Christ as the only Avatara, we're Hindus in that we see the Avatara as something that comes again and again. After all, if Christ is the Avatara, it's never enough to hear a message once. We have to hear it again and again and again. And more importantly, since the Christ is the incarnation of God, and since God is infinitely compassionate, it only makes sense that God will come again and again and again. Even Christians know this because they talk about the second coming. For Hindus, we say it's the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth and the sixth. We have a few more comings. We tend to come a lot. It's a, sorry. It's a sex positive tradition. But the point is, there's not only one Avatara in Hinduism, but there is actually only one Avatara. So like the paradox here is we totally agree that there's only one Avatara. However, what we disagree on is that the Avatara is just one particular person in one particular cultural context. By the way, a cultural context that very few Christians ever even really understand. If you want to really be Christian, you better be Jewish first. That's my claim. Like if you want to base everything on the Christ, you have to remember that he was a rabbi teaching Judaism to Jews. So I don't know what all these other people think they're doing, claiming to know the word of Christ, having never read the word in its original language, much less lived or understood the cultural context in which those words are spoken. But anyway, we say there's a cultural value to what the Avatara says necessarily. After all, he's teaching to people and people are living in a culture, in a society. And so he has to teach to the student, if you will. There's a cultural aspect. But because there are different times and different people, that same transmission must be said in different ways. So what the Hindu will say generally, unless you're like, in that sectarian form of Hinduism, which is sadly becoming more common these days. We really did learn something from our Christian missionaries, didn't we? So the British colonial powers have really, I think, done a number on us because now we are starting to speak like them. This is the one true way. They're all wrong. Come on, hooray. That's like manifestly against the Christian ethos. When the Christ came, we Hindus were like, yes, we accept him fully. Obviously, he's a God man. Look how pure he is. He's a supreme yogi. Come, Christ, come. We loved him. And the Christians were like, great, that was easy. That was, wow, okay. And then they were like, wait, what are you doing? You're still worshiping Krishna? We're like, yeah. Christ is God, but so is Krishna. And the Christians are like, oh. It's hard to get it into a Hindu's head that there's only one version of God. There are so many different people, and if God is compassionate, God comes to each person in a way that best suits his or her or their predisposition. So therefore, the Avatara comes again and again and again, not to destroy, but to fulfill. So we also accept there's only one Avatara, there's only one person that comes, but we have to say that he comes again and again and again. She comes, really, again and again and again, and gives the same message in a different way. So that's the beauty of studying Rama's life, Krishna's life, Buddha's life, Chaitanya's life, and of course, Christ's life, and of course, Ramakrishna. We'll see there's a difference between them all in a sense because they're all kind of speaking in a different way to adjust to their particular cultural climate. But there's also something that stays the same. And so when you read the Gītā next to the New Testament, you get this eerie feeling of like, oh my God, it's the same text. And so now I want to bring up another point in terms of our tradition and texts. So when Swami Vivekananda left the Baranagar Mutt, This is like in 1886 to 1890. He was kind of going here, going there. But 1890, 1891, he actually started traveling long distances. And when he left in 1890, he wouldn't return back until 1897. So he would be gone for like some 6, 7 years like that. So while he was a wandering monk in India, he had two books with him. And this is a fun exercise. Imagine you're about to wander the world right now and you can only bring two books. What two books will it be? This is one of my favorite questions to ask sadhus, you know. You can just try to find what the essential texts are. Because we don't have infinite time to read infinite books. Isn't it a beautiful question? It's like a goosebumps. Oh, yeah, the goosebumps series. You can only bring two books, but damn, which ones? There's so many different goosebumps one. Like that's gonna be a nice debate. Which goosebumps am I gonna bring? I like the one with the werewolf. I forgot what it was called. 50 Shades of Grey, obviously. Anyway, once I was speaking to a wonderful nun, very austere, very powerful nun, who was a disciple of Swami Bhuteshanandaji. So I was asking her about um, Kingdom Hearts manga. I was asking her about like reminiscences of her guru. You know, like what can you tell me about Swami Bhuteshanandaji? What was he like that? These are questions I like to ask. Oh, which brings up another point actually. It's not so much what these people said. Obviously, that's powerful, and that's what we're going to focus on in today's class. But it's more how they lived. You know, because that's the thing. On the internet, we can make whatever Reddit post we want. We can talk a big game. But then when we actually look at what life is like, we're just eating Doritos, like arguing with people on Reddit, and we're just as miserable as we've always been, except maybe more so, because now we have all these philosophies that we use to like gaslight ourselves into feeling like we're enlightened, you know? So, like, the problem is the life is where spirituality is assessed, not the concepts that we understand. So, studying these people's lives has always been really important. And my guru gave me this instruction. I heard another nun, very powerful nun, actually a famous nun, give a lecture at a temple. So I was in the audience with my guru. And after the talk, we went outside and we are both obviously really excited. It was a great talk. And then he took me by the arm and said, watch the life. Words are good, but watch the life. In other words, he told me to pay attention to how she was, how she walked, and how she ate, and how she interacted with others. Not so much what she said. What she said was awesome, but it's true, you know, what she said came and went. I don't really remember the lecture that she gave. It was something something Vedanta, something something Brahman and Atman, you know, it was cool. But you know what I do remember? Her giggle. Like I remember how it was to be with her on the beach, how she took her shoes off and ran into the water. I'll never forget that scene. The way she like with such childlike glee, you know, kicked her shoes off and ran into the ocean. My God, it was like a Sound of Music scene or something like that. And I can hear her giggle. The way she would giggle, it was really something special. And at lunch, I said something, I asked some stupid question, and she looked and she said, all sadhana, Shakti sadhana. But the way with and once at in the parking lot, she was just visiting. She lives in India, but she came and visited for a little while. And I was taking leave of her, so I took my pranam, you know, and when I looked up, it was so beautiful. The sun was shining. She was standing there and she put her hand like this and she went, Durga, Durga. And I'll never forget the way she said, Durga, Durga. Like that, stuff like that, you know, that stuff stays with you and you don't really understand why. You don't know why this kind of thing, like, just has such an emotional effect on you. But that's because the life is what matters, not the fine lectures and speeches. They're really beside the point, you know. That's what we've noticed from watching these people. That's why some people ask me, like, are you enlightened? I laugh in their face when they ask a question like that. I'm like, you don't understand. I'm Indian. I've been to India and I've studied at the feet of Indian sages. I would never dare to say I was enlightened. Until you see that, it's very hard to understand where you are in spiritual life. But once you see that, you have no questions about it. Immediately we realize we're beginners compared to that level of purity and power. Anyway, so my guru said that to me that one time after the lecture. He said, look at the life. Don't care so much about the words, the life. And so like that, I'm always curious to learn about these great masters like Swami Bhuteshananda. So asking for reminiscences is one of my favorite habits. So I was asking this one nun about her master, Bhuteshananda. This is a different nun. So I'm asking her, and then she said, oh, he only had two books. Ah, I was excited. I was like, here's the two books thing. Like, what are the two books? And so I tried to guess them. It was a fun game. I was trying to guess. I was like, okay, one of them is obviously the Gītā. Cha-ching. I was right. You know, that tends to be the one that monks carry around with them wherever they go. It's like the ultimate practical manual of the Upanishads. Of course, it's one of our most beloved books in the tradition. So, Gita. Now, the question is, what was the second book? I guessed Imitation of Christ. And the reason I guessed that was because those were the two books that Swamiji brought with him. When Swamiji traveled all around India, he had two books with him. One was the Bhagavad Gita, unsurprisingly, but the other was the Imitation of Christ. Such a remarkable and important point. It was written anonymously actually, and then later it was attributed to a Catholic monk named Thomas A Kempis. It's a remarkable book. Um, And Swami Prabhavananda, of course, every Easter will probably do a reading of it. He also loves the book, and because of Swami Vivekananda and because of our tradition, he tends to very faithfully comment upon it every single Easter. So I think this year also at Vedanta, New York, Swami Prabhavananda, Pujya Swamiji, gave another discourse on the. I haven't yet heard the whole thing, but I would like to listen. It's the same thing that he does every year, but that's for good reason because it's such an amazing text. It's really the essential teaching of the Christ, and then some because it adds the teachings of great Christian masters and saints, as well as some Greek philosophers. It's a really wonderful work, actually. And Swamiji was so fond of it, Swami Vivekananda, he was so fond of it that he actually partially translated it into Bengali. Now, how about that? The text was so meaningful and so moving to him that he wanted a wider Indian audience to be able to access it because it was at that time in English or something. And he could read it because he grew up studying English and whatnot. But he translated it into Bengali and he wrote a preface, to the book, which is quite stirring and moving. Anyway, I won't say more about that book because Swami Sarvaprandaji, of course, just gave a talk on it, and I'll refer you to that talk. But that's an important, a really, really good book. So that's why I guessed it. I was like, oh, Swami Bhuteshanandaji, he definitely had the Gita. Okay, I was right about that. So probably it was the Imitation of Christ, right? Because we just do what our masters did. So maybe he was inspired by Swamiji, and he also brought that. No, I was wrong. Does everyone want to guess? What do you think it is? It's a fun game, right? One text. Oh, sorry, I knocked my microphone out. What's the one text that you think would be worth having next to the Gita while you wonder about? What do you think? Oh yeah, Kingdom Hearts manga. Duh. I would have loved that answer. I wish she like said, "Oh, obviously like the Snoopy comics, like a compilation of Archie comics or Les Aventures de Tonton et Miu." I would have loved to hear that answer, but The Adventures of Tintin and Snowy. No, but it was the Chandi, right? So it was the Bhagavad Gita and the Chandi. Yeah, Aleister Crowley's book. No, the Chandi, of course, was very important to Swami Bhuteshanandaji, and so he would chant the Chandi regularly. So yeah, those two books, the Gita and the Chandi, that's what Swami Bhuteshanandaji traveled with. But Swami Vivekananda traveled with the Gita and the Imitation of Christ, which offers many word for word direct quotes from the Bible. And many of them are from like the Sermon of the Mount. So that's a very, very important book. What I would bring with me, of course, this is something that one thing that stayed consistent throughout my whole spiritual life. I think no, I can't say my whole spiritual life, but definitely the one book that I would have with me all the time is the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Obviously, that's like my favorite book. If I could only save one book from my house in a burning building, it'd be the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. If I was stranded on a desert island and I only had one book for the rest of my life to read, I would never get bored of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Swami Nikhilanandaji's translation, perfect for me. I can read it again and again and again. And the reason why I love that book is because it's not a book. It doesn't offer me knowledge. Of course, it has a lot of that. So my intellectual side is, of course, satiated because the book offers a lot of philosophical reflections. But what I like about the book is that it's a portal into a very divine place with the most divine person I've ever met, I've ever encountered. And the reason I can say that is because I met the disciple of the disciple of the disciple of this man. And having met that man, the disciple of the disciple of the disciple of this man, I know something of this man. And therefore, it's no problem. I can just, this is my, I know for a fact, having met the disciple of the disciple of the disciple of this man, what kind of man this was. So I'm just happy to hang out with him, even if it's just through the book. Just to think about all these scenes sitting with Vivekananda and Rakal is going into an ecstasy because Vivekananda is singing a song, and Thakur is sitting there smiling on his bench, like, oh my God, this is enough for the rest of my life. I need no other books besides the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. So that's my favorite book. But if I had two books, I don't know. The second one is always changing. I like the Swami Bhuteshananda idea of just having the Chandi with me. Sometimes I think it's the Tirumurai. I get a lot out of that. It's a compendium. It's a Tamil work in which appears the works of like the Tirumantiram, for instance, by like Tirumurai, the Tirumurai Tirumantiram, like stuff like that. Tirumulars, Tirumantiram. Like those Tamil works are pretty special for me. Maybe Manikavasa or Shiva Puranam, just because from my childhood I was chanting that, so that might be nice to keep me grounded in that Shiva Bhakti ideal. But I don't know, you guys. Honestly, like these days, I think it's the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, Volume 2 of the nine volume complete works. Those are my two favorites now. Ask me in 10 years, and I'll probably the second book will change, but the first book probably won't. The first book has stayed consistent for quite a long time. But the problem is those are big books. So it's going to be hard to put in your pocket and walk around. The Imitation of Christ and the Bhagavad Gita, yeah, right? It would be kind of a. But the Bhagavad Gita and the Imitation are small books. and you can just keep them in your satchel as you wander about India, as you wander about the world. So Swami Vivekananda, he brought the Bhagavad Gita and he brought the Imitation of Christ. Swami Bhuteshanandaji brought the Bhagavad Gita and he brought the Chandi. Now, I think it would be really cool to just have the Sermon on the Mount. Like just that. It gives you every possible thing that you need for a successful spiritual life. It shows the ends and it provides the means, and it's like a code. It's like a mnemonic device almost. You like can click into it, as it were, to access entire universes of spiritual teachings. And the Christ, because he's like Krishna, because like Rama, because like Buddha, because like Chaitanya, the Christ is an avatara, he's able to give the very essence in the most practicable way. Therefore, that's why I want to talk about the Sermon on the Mount. Not only because it's an excellent piece of spiritual literature, but not only because today is the day Pope Francis kicked his mortal coil, so as an offering to him, but also mainly because it's so important in our tradition. There's another book I want to introduce you to. It's very good introduction to spiritual life. It's called Sermon on the Mount According to Vedanta. It's by Swami Prabhavananda. It's quite modern. You have to remember that Vivekananda was speaking to like an 1890s, early 20th century audience. Okay, so Vivekananda kicked his body in 1902, and between 1893 and 1902, he was giving lectures. So his language is, of course, eternal, timeless. But if he could come and give his message again now, he would probably say things a little differently. Obviously, because these masters tend to update what they say depending on the cultural needs of their time, place, setting. So Swami Prabhavananda, he says exactly what Ramakrishna says and what Vivekananda says, but he presents it in a slightly more modern way. That's why I like Swami Prabhavanandaji's Sermon on the Mount According to Vedanta. That's a book that I very much highly recommend to one and all. It gives you the essence of what japa is like. It tells you about basic spiritual practices, all based on Vedanta, as per Swami Vivekananda, as Sri Ramakrishna. So yeah, and Dasi is saying the Sermon on the Mount was very much loved by Saint Francis. He quoted it actually, and that's a beautiful movie, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, where Saint Francis he goes and Donovan does the soundtrack, so it's got this very cute '60s flower child sensibility, but it's a very moving spiritual film. Like I cry every time I watch it. It's really moving, really wonderful. So anyway, I recommend watching it. Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon. It's a biography on Saint Francis. Anyway, having said all of this, this is the value of the text that we're going to study now. The Sermon on the Mount by none other than one of the greatest masters of all time, God himself, Jesus Christ. So I want to give it a tantric reading. We'll say a few words about a few parts of the Sermon on the Mount. We might not do the whole thing today. I just want to point out a few of the Beatitudes and make some tantric points about it. So I'm going to maybe reference a little bit of Swami Prabhavanandaji's transmission from the Sermon on the Mount according to Vedanta, but mostly I'm going to keep my discourse within the context of Abhinavagupta's Tantraloka and Kali Sadhana, Shakta Sadhana, like that. So I'm going to speak tantrically about the Sermon on the Mount, but I just want you to know that there is Swami Prabhavanandaji's work called Sermon on the Mount according to Vedanta. So that's there, and I hope that you will all pick a copy of that up because it's so good. And also one more thing, that has another significance for us specifically, because Swami Prabhavanandaji was the person who started the Hollywood Center in the 1930s. In fact, in the Hollywood Vedanta Temple, it was the first time, arguably in known history, that Kali was worshipped publicly in the West. So the first Kali Puja ever probably happened in the late 1930s in the Hollywood Vedanta Society. So that's quite a lineage, actually. It's quite a heritage. So every year, Kali is being worshipped since the 1930s, in the Vedanta Society temple. And Swami Prabhavanandaji was the one who founded the temple. So he was a disciple of Swami Brahmananda. So our guru is Swami Brahmananda. And Swami Brahmananda is Swami Prabhavananda's guru. So that Brahmananda energy is very powerful in the Vedanta Society. And Swami Prabhavananda is the one who composed this book called Sermon on the Mount according to Vedanta. So when you read that book, you'll feel the energy of Swami Brahmananda, which is present in Guide to Spiritual Life and Eternal Companion. Do you know what? Actually, that might be a good book to bring around with us. Swami Sarvapriyanandaji once told me that book was the one that made him a monk. That was his turning point. Eternal Companion by Swami Brahmananda. So if it's not volume 2 by Swami Vivekananda, it's probably that book, Eternal Companion. That book made quite an impression on me too. And there's another book I quite like. It's called Guide to Spiritual Life. It's in Bengali by Swami Brahmananda, but it's been translated by Swami Chetan Ananda, the one who translated the Leela Prasanga. So anyway, that's a good book. It's called Guide to Spiritual Life by Swami Brahmananda, translated by Swami Chaitanya Ananda. I'll put all of these in the description of the video if I can remember to do so. Ma willing, I will. Otherwise, remind me. But yeah, so like those are good books. Eternal Companion by Swami Prabhavananda, who is writing about his guru, Swami Brahmananda, and Guide to Spiritual Life by Swami Brahmananda, translated by Swami Chaitanya Ananda. Those are also books worth taking around with you. You know. So by the way, if you told me I wasn't allowed to take the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, I would probably take the Eternal Companion. So anyway, those are great books, and you'll feel the energy that you feel in those books in Swami Prabhavananda's Sermon on the Mount according to Vedanta. It's an unmistakable Brahmananda energy, which is one of the facets of the infinitely varied and complex and yet direct transmission called Sri Ramakrishna. So that's our lineage, and in our particular Guru Parampara, that Swami Brahmananda energy is strong, and therefore I think Swami Prabhavanandaji and his work is important, not just in founding the Hollywood Temple or setting the precedent of Kali worship here in the West, which is something we're all benefiting from now, but more importantly because we're in that lineage. Right? So many of us directly in that lineage of Swami Brahmananda up to Sri Ramakrishna. So that book, I recommend it. I think will be very nourishing for your spiritual life. Okay, having said all of that, now let's start commenting upon the Sermon on the Mount from a tantric perspective. Anyway, took me like an hour to finish all the disclaimers for this lecture, but like that's the lecture, I guess. Like that much I think is enough, and it's just a way for me to dilly dally, so I don't actually have to do the thing that I want to do, but I'm scared to do. I'm like terrified to do this. I like it's just so profound, you know. Anyway, translation is not important. I really don't think it is. And I'm going to say that because I'm not in an academic mode at all right now. I couldn't care less what the words are in Hebrew or Aramaic or anything, like in Greek. It doesn't matter right now. What matters is merely, oh, Diane, Jaima, so good to see you here. No, no, don't worry. You came in 1 hour into the lecture. We're just getting started. But I unfortunately I'm not going to be academic about this. So I'm not going to tell you like what translate. I'm just going to go online. I'm just going to type one in right now. Yep. And I'm just going to see what comes up. Okay, here we go. Matthew 5 through 7. Here's okay, New International Version. This is from Bible Gateway. That's a cool one. BibleGateway.com. BibleGateway.com. So of course, any translation that you're using will work because I'm just going to use this now as like a springboard just to talk about some tantric ideas that might be particularly pertinent for Kali sadhana, for Shakta sadhana, that kind of thing. Okay, let's do it. You ready? Here we go. So I'm going to move some things around. So the introduction to the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them. That itself you can meditate on for the rest of your life. Like that is a scene, and part of how we work with these teachings is to try to recreate the scene in our mind and then meditate on that scene and try to enter into that scene. This is called Lila Dhyana. This is very important, not just in the tantric world, it applies to devotion as a whole. So tantra, as you know, tantra uses as one of its central modalities bhavana, which doesn't just mean contemplation, it also means imagination. That's one of the distinctive features of tantra actually. So you might have noticed earlier before we started the lecture when we were doing the puja, part of that is to do dhyana mantra, which means meditating on a particular form of the formless reality by reciting a mantra that describes quite formally and quite aesthetically that particular form. So let's say we're doing Shiva. Now, in that dhyana mantra, Dhyaya Nityam Mahesham Rajata Girinibam Charu Chandra Vatangsam, we're given some pretty suggestive imagery, like a mountain of silver shining. Ratna Kalpoj Valangam, all of his angas, his limbs, are covered with jewels, if you will, like the star-studded sky. Ratna Kalpoj Valangam. And then something very anthropomorphic. Parashumar Gavara Bhiti Hastam Prasannam. He's holding an axe, and he's holding a deer, and he's holding Abhaya Mudra and Vara Mudra. So like that, you see 4 arms. Shiva has 4 arms holding these various symbolic things. And he's Padmasinam Samantat Stutamama Raganar Vagakritim Vasanam. He's seated in the lotus posture, or you can translate this as seated on a lotus, the lotus of the heart, and he's absorbed in meditation. So now in your mind's eye, you see this 4-armed deity who's shining like a silver mountain. Limbs adorned with jewelry, and he's like absorbed in deep meditation. Now, if you see someone meditating, because of mirror neurons, you enter into a meditative state. This is true also of visualizing a person meditating. What to say of visualizing the embodiment and incarnation of meditation par excellence. So think of Shiva, who is meditation embodied, will immediately send the mind into a meditative state. That's how mirror neurons work. So in the mirror of the intellect, you conjure up an image of Shiva in samadhi. And then it says, this is interesting. It's not just Shiva. The whole setting is made out for you. You know, there's a set and setting. There are these Avarana devatas. So Shiva never comes alone. He always comes with his retinue, and his retinue are like sages, rishis like Narada Muni and whatnot, Sanaka, Narada, like all these like great sages, Deva rishis, Maharishis like that. But also demons, asuras, ganas, bhutas, pishachas, rakshasas like that, pishachinis like that. All these beings from the high to the low, gandharvas, apsaras, and the kind of neutral. They're like the chaotic bad ones, and the chaotic neutral ones, and the chaotic good ones, and the lawful good ones, and the lawful neutral ones. Like there are all these various forms of beings, and they're all gathered around Shiva, hymning him. Stutta. They say they're all praising him. So when you think of Shiva, you're not just thinking of Shiva, you're also thinking of the devotees gathered around Shiva, praising him, hymning him. And that will give you a lot of nourishment and inspiration, spiritually speaking. Then you contemplate him philosophically. Now, Vishvadyam, he is the ground of reality. Vishvadyam, Vishva Bijam, and he is the source from which it comes forth. So you can think of Brahman, consciousness, Vivarta, the appearance of the world within consciousness, like contemplating that. And then Nikhila, there's Bhairavi, Nikhila Devi there. Nikhila, Bhayaharang. So Nikhila means he shines, he's full of light, he's pure consciousness. Bhayaharang, he destroys all Bhaya, fear. So that shining, effulgent, destroyer of fear. Panchavaktram, he has five heads, or five mouths, but really five heads. Trinetram, three eyes, which also comes with a lot of symbology, like five heads. Why five heads? Well, Icha Shakti, Kriya Shakti, Jnana Shakti, Chit Shakti, Ananda Shakti, like that. Or the Pancha mantras, Tat Purushaya Vidmaya, Gorebhyo, the five mantras, the Taittiriya Upanishad. Brian G, I'll see you soon in Atlanta. So excited for our retreat. Atlanta retreat fam. We're leaving tomorrow. Some of you, like Viranataji, he's already on the road. So he's tuning in from a hotel. It's very nice. All the ganas are converging. I'm very excited to hear about it. Anyway, so this visualization of Shiva, see how charged it is with philosophical meaning, with poetic aesthetic meaning. Like when you visualize this, you are using your intellect in its highest, most refined way by using visualization and imagination. So that's true even of today's like new age understanding of Tantra. A lot of it is about imagination, visualizing this, visualizing that. So when you do chakra meditation, for instance, even if in its most like theosophical, new agey sense, it's still all about meditation. And that's very much in keeping with classical tantra. So you might have a different idea about what color the chakras are, because some guy lead beater may have deluded you into thinking that this color or that color, and I'm just kidding. But even if you take like a new agey appropriation idea of like what you think tantra is, even that will stress a very classically tantric idea which you must visualize. So you visualize the lotus in the Muladhara and like that. You visualize one by one as lotuses or as wheels, the chakras in the body, and you try to meditate on particular places in the body that are associated with particular visualizations. At the very least, visualization of light, like nectar pouring into the crown of your head, like that. So imagination is very important. Bhavana. So when we read a text like the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, it's not enough to simply read it cover to cover. I mean, that's good too. It'd be helpful. But it's best to read it and try to enter into the Leela that it presents. This is called Leela Dhyana, meditating on the play of the divine. So when you start a passage of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, there are some contextual notes in the beginning, like, oh, Sri Ramakrishna is sitting with, and then there's a dramatis personae, if you will. Keshav Chandra Sen is there, and then Narendranath is there, or like whoever. And you like try to, in your mind's eye, visualize all these various people. Some of them are Bengali babus with big mustaches, fancy type people. Others are like scruffy kids like Narendranath, 19-year-olds who are skipping school to come there. And you just think about all of this, think about who's there. And then it's really, yeah. And then it's really nice if you have in your mind's eye a picture of that room. So going to visit was very nice and very helpful for me. Like just seeing that room and sitting there and meditating there. Still one of my favorite places in all of India to meditate. So like just in front of Shri Ramakrishna's room in that north veranda. So anyway, you can sit and look at the room, or you can just Google it online, or there's a picture, I think in Swami Nikhilanandaji's translation, there's a picture of the room. And so you think of that room, and you think of who's seated on the floor, and you think of Sri Ramakrishna seated on the cot. And like that, before you start hearing what he has to say, you first see the scene in which he said those words. And then you have sadhu sangha, just like that. You're surrounded by Vivekananda and Brahmananda and others. And before they were great world famous monks and teachers, like as they were boys. And you get to be a young kid with these other young kids. And you get to listen to the great master speak the most exalted words, emphasizing jnana, bhakti, kriya, all of these things. Like it's so beautiful. That scene is itself a spiritual practice without even considering what needs to be said. So in the gospel, there's a beautiful story about Sri Chaitanya. Sri Ramakrishna tells this story. Apparently, okay, so Sri Chaitanya went on a pilgrimage to South India. He actually went to go learn from somebody, which is interesting. God himself usually has gurus. Like Christ learned from John the Baptist, Ramakrishna had many gurus like that. So even God has a guru. That's why I often joke, if even God needed a guru, somehow you think you don't. Many people think they don't need gurus. That's fine. You can learn to drive a car on your own if you want, but it's dangerous for you and it's dangerous for me. So if you want to learn to drive, you can try to self teach yourself, but I'd rather you stay off the road and like better go to a driving school, Baba. Like actually learn from somebody. So that's the thing. God Himself, even God Himself needed a guru. So Christ had John the Baptist, Sri Ramakrishna had many teachers, the Bhairavi, Brahmani, and whatnot. But in this case, Chaitanya actually went to go and seek someone out to learn. Chaitanya had many gurus. Mainly, he had a Diksha guru, and he also had a Sannyas guru. Ishva Puri, and anyway, but he went to go get instruction from the South Indian Pandit who was a master of bhakti. And so during his pilgrimages, he had all these stories, all these leelas. So in one story, according to Sri Ramakrishna, he saw a person, a Pandit, reading out from the Bhagavad Gita, reading the Bhagavad Gita. And then there was a man sitting nearby who was just like weeping and weeping and weeping. And obviously, Chaitanya was very moved by this show of devotion. So he went to this man seated off to the side, like Christ would say, sit in the lowliest of places. So this man was kind of sitting in the lowliest of places and he was just kind of off to the side. So Chaitanya, Deva, Chaitanya is a great Pandit, versed in Sanskrit like that. So he asked this man, do you understand what's being read out? Do you understand this at all? And the man was like, no, not a word. I don't understand anything that's being said. I don't speak Sanskrit. I don't know what the Pandit is on about. And then Chaitanya was shocked and surprised to see him still seated there amidst the congregation listening to this intellectual discourse. He said, then why are you weeping? And he said, because I see in my mind's eye Krishna and the chariot, and Shri Krishna is teaching Arjuna, and I see this and I weep. It's a remarkable idea. Even before hearing what Krishna has to say to Sri Arjuna, just seeing that scene, that itself is God's compassion. You know how the Bhagavad Gita ends? It breaks my heart every time. It's just so moving and so profound. The whole Bhagavad Gita is Arjuna asking Sri Krishna questions, right? Question after question, Arjuna asks Sri Krishna, and time and time again, Shri Krishna gives an answer. He never gets tired. He's never like, oh, only if you subscribe to this tier of Patreon, or like, oh, like go and read that book or buy. He's just there, sitting in front of Arjuna, willing to tell him the answer to any question he might have to ask. And at the end, God asks his first question to humanity, arguably. So here's Arjuna, the representation of humanity, asking questions of God. That feels fitting. But don't you think God has questions for us? Yes, he does. And she asks it through Sri Krishna at the very end of the Bhagavad Gita. You know what the question is? It's so moving. It's like goosebumps kind of thing. Not in the book sense. But the question is, Sri Krishna asks Arjuna, have all your doubts now been removed? What a beautiful question. God comes in the form of the teacher, answers every possible question we can have about spiritual life, and then at the very end is generous enough to ask us, are you good, fam? Do you get it? Do you need this to be said in a different way or something? Like, God checks in to make sure that we learned what she had to say. You see, these days, gurus aren't like that. It's all about being on some big stage and having all the cameras pointed at you, and you never really know about the students. Sometimes you hear them laugh like a laugh track or something, but you don't really hear about the students. You only see the teacher. All the cameras are pointed to the teacher. So the teacher becomes this like media personality, like big YouTube channel cult figure. That's cool and all, but that's not the ideal of education. It's about the student. And so I often joke, it might be nice to have the cameras pointed to the student, not to the teacher, because the effectiveness of the teacher is not in how cool they are and how charismatic they are and how eloquently they can say this or that. The power of the teacher is seeing the transformation in the eyes of the student. I don't care so much about the Buddha holding up a flower, that's awesome. I care more about that one disciple who got the teaching, in whose face the full bloom of spiritual illumination must have shone. Can you imagine? There, the Buddha is standing and he's holding a flower, and everyone's like, the fuck is this guy on about? Because the Buddha that day didn't say anything. He was very wordy. The Buddha gave long lectures, hours and hours and hours he would talk, but that day he didn't say anything. He just came out and gave a demonstration. He held up a flower. And allegedly, one person in the audience got the teaching. It was a direct transmission, and that person founded the Chan or the Zen tradition. But like, I want to look at that person's face more, to see him go from darkness to light, from ignorance to knowledge, from death to immortality. I want to see the eternal Rudra evermore shine in his face. That transformation is infinitely more interesting to me than what the teacher has to say. So similarly, Sri Krishna teaches to the student. It's not just like a Sri Krishna cult of personality. It's like it's about Arjuna, the devotee. And so he asks him at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Do you have any doubts? And if Arjuna was satisfied, he was like, okay, not only have I intellectually been satisfied, but I also like saw God in the course of the discourse. He saw the Vishwaroop and all of that. But obviously he's satisfied. And you know what actually happens? There's another teaching that comes later. It's called the Shanti Gītā. I was telling you a little bit about it last week, where Arjuna's son Abhimanyu is like killed in the war through unethical means. And so Shri Krishna gives another teaching called the Shanti Parva. But anyway, at this moment, Arjuna is satisfied. What is it with Nidya? Oh, well, no, it's not a need. I mean, like, I appreciate it. Like, I'm always really happy to see your faces and I'm always looking at them, because, like, to see Viranatha and to see Nataraj and to see Scotchy and Satyaji and Nicola and Ruth and Terashiva, Ma, I've missed you. It's been a while. To see Suparna and to see Dasi, it's like, it's awesome. There's nothing like it. Like, being able to, like, actually see you and talk to you is so much better to me than, like, just a wall of names. But also, I would never say that. I'm withdrawing that statement because I also want you to feel totally comfortable here. I don't want you to feel like, oh, well, it's a social space. Like do your laundry, like do your dishes, like lie down and go to bed. Like we'll have a sleepover. Like don't ever at any point feel pressure to turn your camera on. Okay, like that's why I don't like to say it. Like these Scott cheese over there. I don't like to be like, oh yeah, I like to. Sometimes some teachers in middle school they're like, cameras on, please, bro, chill. Like do whatever you want. This is spiritual time, meaning like there's no rules. There can never be no rules. But thank you for asking that, Ma. I do appreciate your question. And like, I love to see you, but I also love more. I love more that you're comfortable. So please don't ever in this space feel pressured to turn on the camera, okay? And some people, after the camera's on for a while, you're like, this guy's just going on and on. I think I need to like, I take a Zoom break, walk around. Like, don't even. It's so fine. It's so fine. But anyway, like, if there's even one face, I'm set. Like, all I need is like one face, and usually there's at least that. And so if there's one face, I'm just like looking at you the whole time, and then I'm good, and I just like speak like, and then it's fine. But I remember once I logged in, and there was like, okay, now there's like about 65, 64 people now. That room, there were like, I think 80, 70, 80 people, but it was all just names. And I was like, oh my God, there are 80 names, and the only screen is a screen of me. And then I got shy and self-conscious. I'm like, I'm watching myself talk right now. Ugh. And also, like, I have no feedback. I like don't even know like what to say or that was one of the hardest, I think, talks I've ever done in my life. It was horrifying. It was terrible. And then I was like, okay, I should just like close my eyes. That would have been better for that talk. That would have been nice. But anyway, I can see it like you, and that's enough. That way, like whoever last spoke will be on my screen, which I like. So right now it's like Scott G. It's on my screen. Good. Now I can look at Scott G and just talk. And then every now and then I'm like clicking through the button and like looking at Satya G and Nicola and Ruth and all that. So I think we're human beings together. And importantly, we're not even looking at each other. We're looking at Krishna, Rama, Buddha, Jesus. So we're like kind of gathered around one another, looking at something else. Do you know what I mean? That's very important to me. By the way, I really, really hope that you all got a chance to listen to the Who Can Be a Guru lecture. That's a very important lecture because there I said in the Tantric tradition, we saw in verses 2 and 3 of the Paramarthasara, only God can be a guru. In other words, God as incarnation is the best guru. So we should learn from Krishna. We shouldn't pretend to be Krishna. you know like that's a very important principle too. So we're all together here looking at Krishna. So that was a bit of a digression, but I think it's a sweet question and sweet to clarify. So God's always looking at us, and God's always asking whether we need to hear it in a different way, and most importantly, she's always ready to offer it. That's why there are so many different religions. To say there's only one true way and every other way is wrong actually demeans God. It makes God less compassionate. If God was maximally compassionate, then God would offer many, many different ways that suit different people in different cultural climates with different predispositions. Therefore, there must be many religions, and therefore there are many different ways to answer the same question. So Sri Ramakrishna, you can see how he's changing his discourse, as it were, to suit the person in front of him. It really is more important to him that that person is taught than that he teach. But some people, they prefer to teach than to actually teach. They prefer to talk than to teach, I think. That's the thing. Some people love to hear the sound of their own voice and they love to talk, but they don't love to teach. Because what teaching requires is responsibility. It requires actually following up with the student and checking to see what their needs are and not just what your egoic need to be heard is. So part of that is what Sri Krishna demonstrates for us at the end of the Bhagavad Gita. He looks to Arjuna, and everything that he's offered now was not for a big internet audience or for a publication of a book. Even Thomas A. Kempis leaves his name out of the publication of The Imitation of Christ. That's truly Christ-like. What is the bauble of fame, as Swami Prabhavananda once said? What is the bauble of fame to these people, No, Swami Vivekananda said that. Sorry, in the preface to the Imitation of Christ, he's like, fame is like a bauble to these God intoxicated people. Why should they put their name, an author's name? What's that to them? Anyway, so Krishna is speaking in private to Arjuna, and it's very telling when at the end he asks, so have your doubts been removed? So notice, yeah, that's a really cool mode. Just from this perspective. Oh, and you know what's nice about Thursday? I don't know how you configure Zoom in this way, but on Thursday I can have it on gallery mode and still bounce out a video that's like speaker only. But weirdly enough, for this Zoom, if I go on gallery mode, the video that comes out is of the whole gallery. So I'm not able to go to gallery mode anymore. So I can only go to speaker view and have everyone out as like a carousel on the right and just like kind of scroll through. If you ever hear any clicking on the microphone, that's what I'm doing. I'm like clicking and scrolling through all the cameras. But I think this is the really, really beautiful point that these texts offer us. When you think about the Bhagavad Gita, it's not it's not merely a philosophical discourse or a transmission. It's also a lila dhyana. You can meditate on Shri Krishna talking to Arjuna on the battlefield, and that itself is spiritually nourishing. Like in that story, that person just saw in his mind's eye Krishna teaching Arjuna, and without ever having understood anything of what Krishna said, he cried and cried and cried because that itself was so moving. With the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, we don't actually even need to understand what Sri Ramakrishna is saying. It's enough to simply have some time with him and the Sangha, with Sarada Devi, like just be in that holy company. And if you like the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the Gospel of the Holy Mother is there also. And then you can be with Vivekananda and the complete works and all of that. So good. Anyway, in the Bible, you get the same thing. You get a lila dhyana. You get to see the Christ hang out with people. And I think this first phrase really captures that. It says in the book of Matthew, in this new international translation, now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. So we can like just think about that. How people are gathered to hear this great master speak. And so he saw them and he's moved. He's moved by seeing people coming for sincere spiritual instruction. So he goes, and then what does he do? Does he stand on a pulpit? He sits down. That you can just analyze that. Like he sits down. He hosts satsang sitting down. Just imagine he's like Milarepa or something, seated in royal ease pose maybe, or maybe he's seated cross-legged like a meditating yogi, or maybe he's seated on a rock with his hands on his knees. I don't know. What does he look like to you in your mind's eye before you hear what the Christ has to say? First, see him. First, meditate upon him and see how compassionately he's ready to address the crowds. Now, feel yourself to be among those who are gathered for spiritual knowledge. Wherever two or more are there in my name, there I am also, like that. So he's here in the room by virtue of us having spoken about him. Yeah, and Satyaji is pointing out because he was fresh back from India and he got into sitting cross-legged. Or like he's used to the satsang style of India, maybe. Or it's just the case that great spiritual masters, they are so chill, they're so relaxed, they just sit. And having established his seat, his asana, only then does he teach. So there's a whole metaphor here about like grounding and teaching from a sitting position. There's a lot to unpack there. In fact, we say, I'm sitting on an asana right now. We say it is inappropriate to give a discourse on spirituality unless you're sitting on your asana. Asan means seat. I have a deer skin, and on top of the deer skin, I have a Jairambati mat, which was stitched in Jairambati. This is what I use for meditation and for puja. But when I speak to you, I should be sitting on that too. So lest I forget that this is also a puja, that this is sacred, and that what we're doing here is something done in the name of God. Therefore, we must be seated on an asana for it, just to honor the thing that's happening now. It's a ritual. So therefore, the Christ sitting evokes these ideas of like the asana and the power of the asana, and what it means to take your asana, to take your seat in order to be able to speak. There's a Vyas asana. It's very cool. It's like a elevated seat, but it's only slightly elevated. And so usually the Shankaracharyas, in the Vedantic context, in the Shankara Mattas, the Mahant, the head monk, usually he or the head nun, she or they will sit on this Vyasasana. It's very interesting because it's not like a throne or anything like that. It's just slightly elevated off the floor and it's like just one board. And it's called the Vyasa asana. But I think the name is very telling. It's an asana, meaning it's a seat. But it's the Vyasa asana, the seat of Veda Vyasa, who is the guru granddaddy of the entire lineage. He's like, not only did he compose the Mahabharata, he also organized all the Vedas into four discrete books. Like he commented on the Yoga Sutra Patanjali. He's like this anachronistic figure, this divine rishi who gives Shankara tenure. And like, he's a Mahapurush kind of a Chiranjeev type. He just appears here, he appears there. But he's the Vedic seer par excellence. You can imagine him with the big beard and the top knot and like, but simple, living off fruits and roots. So Vyasa is the name of this great master, and this is Vyasa's seat. So when one sits in Vyasa's seat, they're reminded that they can of their own selves do nothing, right? Like they can't say anything, and everything they say should merely be a presentation of what Vyasa said, like that. So a person sitting on this seat, it's like a judge putting on a wig. They're stepping out of their own personality and their own idiosyncrasies, and they're trying to subsume their individuality into something greater, the lineage and the transmission that is, yeah, something like compiler, Veda Vyasa. Okay, so this Vyasa, he has a seat. And when we sit on that seat, we think the same Vyasa, the spirit of that Vyasa, the Guru Shakti, is flowing in an unbroken transmission throughout the lineage. So now when Christ is sitting there, you think, what is the Christ lineage? And you can think of John the Baptist and that whole tradition of the Essenes. And you can think, wow, what knowledge was there in that Essenic kind of Judaic mysticism? Some of it is coming out in the Gnostic scrolls, Nag Hammadi, like that. But think about that. And then think about, maybe some of you have, the idea that Christ went to India. Think about that wisdom coming. Or just like whatever, just think about what that seat represents. I'm just offering a few suggestions. I'm not making any claims here. But the only claim I want to make is that this is a dhyana, a meditation. Lila dhyana, it's called. Meditation on the play of the divine. Okay, so Jesus saw the crowds. He went up on a mountainside and sat down. Also, you know what's interesting? He had no microphone. So you can think about that. How the crowd, probably they were really like loud, just talking and all that. But then when he went up to the mountainside and everybody could see him, and then he sat down, imagine what they must have felt looking upon him. And then the probably like a hush falls. And now in this hush, the Christ begins to teach. And he said, so this is Rishi Uvacha, Yesu Vacha, like in the Bhagavad Gita, we find Krishna speaks or Arjuna speaks. So now he said, Rishi Uvacha. It's a very important statement. In the Tantras, we often find Deva Uvacha, or like God speaks, and Bhairavi, Devi Uvacha. Like these are moments to pay attention. So he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now he offers a series of beatitudes. I'm going to start with this one. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. I want to start with that because I think it applies to the Christ directly. Who is a peacemaker? There are very few of them in the universe. Not just in the world, what to say of the world, but in the universe, there are very few of them. They're almost always a minority. You know how they say many are called, but few are chosen? It's not just that. Many are called, many are chosen, but few will answer the call. Every one of us is called, but very few of us are willing to actually pick up the phone. We're too busy with our day-to-day humdrum. We're too busy with our lives to really answer the soul's eternal call for freedom and peace. Only the one who has attained peace can themselves become a peacemaker. Can you make peace in the world when there's anger in your heart? You can try. Many have tried. But look at the result. Those who have hatred and anger in their heart, who set out to bring peace, only end up exacerbating hate and anger. It's miraculous to me that in this day and age, and in every day and age, we have considered our anger and our righteousness a means for peace. How can you get the number 3 from the color red? They are categorically different things. The color red will never produce the number 3. Similarly, hatred will never produce love. This was MLK's statement. On MLK Day, we had that lecture. We talked about Swami Vivekananda's statement, his address to the Madras congregation. And you saw there were some parallels. Obviously, MLK was very inspired by Gandhi, but Gandhi, importantly, was very inspired by Vivekananda. So you see similar ideas flowing through that parampara, if you might call it that. And so MLK told us, darkness can never drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate can never drive out hate. Only love can do that. And yet, in this day and age, and you just have to go on social media to see it, there's so much anger, so much hate, so much restlessness, so much disturbedness. And somehow we think that being restless, being angry, being disturbed is somehow going to increase the net amount of joy and peace and wellness in the world. No, it is only a psychologically integrated person who feels peace in their heart, who is well. Only such a person can bring joy and peace to the world. But how on earth can you feel psychologically well? How on earth can you be happy and peaceful in a time like this? It's a question worth asking. Because if you are any kind of human being with any heart, in any time of history, you would have been awed and humbled by all the horror around you. Now it's of course exacerbated because we have the news. We have more access to the horrors of the world than ever before. But back then, to see the plagues in your kingdom, to see the destitution all around you, how could you move about this world without feeling disturbed and world weary and agitated? There's arguably only one person who is able to be peaceful. and by virtue of being peaceful can bring peace to others. That is the God realized. Only a person who is illumined, you know. Yeah, Sai is a great idea. Sai, it's so good to have you. When you direct your hatred at God, he alchemizes it into love. That's a very deep tantric idea also. But I first want to offer this idea about the guru, the tantric guru. Only a person who has peace in their heart can offer it to others. In other words, a peacemaker is one who is at peace. And there's only one kind of person in this world who's at peace, a person who's realized God. It's always a breath of fresh air when you meet people like this because suddenly you realize they're entirely present. It's here and now with them. And in the here and in the now, there is perfection. And they spend their entire lives administering good to others in this almost like nonchalant way. But their very presence brings peace. And sometimes that's the greatest thing that we can do for somebody to just be present with them, to hold space, and to inspire in their heart that sense of peace. Come to me, all ye who are burdened and heavily laden, I shall give ye rest. That was the Christ's promise. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So he had this effect on the people around him. Remember, their time was very politically charged. There was Roman tyranny. There was all sorts of instability, political instability at their time. It's much like ours. The nothing has changed. You know, people are like, these are the worst times. No, spirituality has always happened in tumultuous times because times are always fucking tumultuous. Any 2-bit tarot card reader, astrologer on YouTube will tell you that. Things are changing right now. People are coming into your life and leaving. There are many ups and downs. Yeah, duh, it's called samsara. The Buddha pulled that tarot card, you know, and he told us that. But no. But yeah, obviously there's a lot of tumultuous times, chaos. That's the nature of samsara. There's nothing new. Nothing is happening now that hasn't always been happening, and it's in the midst of all of that. In the midst of that, like this lecture will age really well. See, I'm not referring to any specific cultural event now. And I don't need to, because this lecture in 20 years, in 30 years, will be just as true as it is now, I think. Because in that time, also something new and something horrible will probably be happening. That's the nature of samsara. But that being said, Christ is there on the mountainside, giving tumultuous, giving everyone rest. Right? Tumultuous. Janam is saying tumultuous? Like Tamils? No, tumultuous. But Christ is giving everyone rest. He is a peacemaker, and it is they who are verily called the children of God. So what does it mean to be a child of God? To be God realized. Sri Ramakrishna said that the person who knows that God alone is the doer, the person who can sincerely say God alone is doing everything, the person who says I can of my own self do nothing, my Father who art in heaven does all these works through me, know that person to be a Jivan Mukta, fully liberated. Sri Ramakrishna's definition of the enlightened person is a person who is fully surrendered to God. That is a person who merely does whatever his father or mother in heaven commands him to do. That person, the servant of God, the dasa of God, dasi of God, that person is verily a child of God because he's taken refuge in God. So don't you think God exists? And if you do think that, then look, is she not doing all of this? Swami Vivekananda had a very important realization. In Shir Bhavani, he was worshipping the Divine Mother. And then he thought, oh my God, the Mongols, you know, the Muslim invaders, they destroyed this temple. What a beautiful temple, Shir Bhavani, up in Kashmir. And they took the image of Ma, which has been worshipped for centuries by centuries of pundits and families. And they took that image and they threw it into the water and they sacked the place. They took away all the jewels, they broke the pillars, and they desecrated the temple. And the poor image was thrown into the lake, and it's still there now, I think. And they worship the image in the lake. Anyway, when Swamiji thought about all this, he got understandably upset. Right? Anybody who has a heart will feel righteous fury at what they're seeing in the world all the time. Or even in thinking about history and thinking about all the oppression that's happened over the years, you feel a righteous fury. So he felt it, just like all of us. How can we think about these things and not feel such a thing? So you're in good company, don't worry. Swami Vivekananda even, towards the end of his life, felt this righteous fury. But then he got schooled. It's a very interesting thing and very high teaching. Mother Kali appeared to him and laughed in his face. Because you know what he said? He said, I will defend this temple. If I was here, I would have never let those invaders ransack the place. In fact, I'm going to stand here now. And I'm not going to leave. I'm going to defend this place forever. And the mother appeared and laughed in his face. And she's like, are you taking care of me or am I taking care of you? And then she said something in another place. She said, if I wanted, I could have built a temple with 7 golden stories. Don't you think the Mongols were my will too? Now, this isn't an argument for inaction. It's not like just like let everything horrible happen in the world. No. What's in front of you? Ma will act through you to address that. But what's happening around you, Ma is that. She's doing all of it. God is playing all the parts. But wait, it's one thing to say that. It's quite another thing to feel that, to understand it, to live that. You know? It's very difficult. It's not easy. It's easy to say here, sitting on my tiger skin asan in a lecture. Would it be so easy to say, like in another situation? I don't know. God willing, we'll have the strength to say it then too. But the person, arguably the only person who can actually say this meaningfully is a God realized person. They actually see God in all things, playing all the roles. And they are truly the ones who can make peace. They are the peacemakers, for they are verily the children of God. So the teaching here is, blessed are the peacemakers. Of course, blessed are the peacemakers. They are blessing unto us all. Without them, what would we do? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. So this is somewhat biographical, autobiographical, because the Christ is referring to himself. He's a peacemaker because he's literally the Son of God, but he is the child of God. So like Paul is saying, to all of us in some of his letters, his epistles to like Galatians and stuff. Like it's important that Paul reminds us that we are like Christ and we can be like Christ and we too are children of God. Christ would say, like Paul would say, ye sons of God, and Christ would say in John, I think 12:14 or 14:12, like these and even greater works shall ye do, for I am going back to the Father. So it's quite clear that the Christ is the Son of God, not the only Son of God. We are all of us sons and daughters and children of God. Having said that, though, to be a child of God is to be a peacemaker. And if you are a peacemaker, it implies that you have peace in your heart. And if you have peace in your heart, it means you fully surrender to God. So the person who knows that God alone is the doer, blessed are they, for they are the peacemakers, and they shall be called the children of God. So here I want to introduce the idea, the tantric idea of the guru. Spiritual life cannot happen without the guru. And the guru is what Christ is to all of these people, a peacemaker. A guru comes and inscrutably inspires peace in our heart, and then we feel that peace to be deeper and more meaningful than any pleasure that the senses can obtain through worldly pursuits. There's something in it, and we can't deny it, and only once we feel it do we know what we mean. So that's the thing, like Usha Ma was telling me yesterday at the Kali Mandir, when she was in Austria before she moved to LA to become a famous actress, she was thinking, I only want to have the most exciting possible life. That's her ideal. Her ideal in life is to have a really fucking exciting life. Like it just has to be fun. She wants to have the maximum fun. And she tried all that Hollywood stuff, like the drugs and the partying and the wild sex and the whole thing, the whole Hollywood thing. And she was like, it was good. She was like, it was fun. And then she made it. She was like, it was boring. It didn't satisfy her. She said, but the feeling that I got when I would arrive an hour early to the Vedanta Center to hear Swami Prabhavananda speak. Again, Swami Prabhavananda, the same one I was talking about earlier. To feel him speak, to be there in the front row, the electricity of that, the enlivenment of that was greater than anything that she had experienced in the wildest, most pleasure-filled Hollywood life. So that's the kind of peace, by Dasima. That's the kind, see you tomorrow. No, the day after tomorrow. That's the kind of peace that cannot be concocted, that cannot be artificially had through consumer capitalism. And it's only when we meet such a peacemaker do we understand that. So the children of God here are the gurus, the various spiritual masters who are like a wire through which the electricity of God flows. When we come into their presence, we feel electrified. It's not them. They're the wire after all. It's the electrocution of the electricity that's running through the wire. So the Guru Shakti flows through the parampara, and in that living human who stands before us, the child of God, we feel peace and blessedness. So spiritual life begins with the Guru, arguably. So Guru is very important in Tantra. We call them peacemakers, and we call them the children of God. So Christ is Guru. And that I think here we can make an important political point also, interestingly, because the Christ was almost always pressured by people around him to take political stances against Roman tyranny. But for him, the greatest revolution was not against the Roman tyranny, it was against the tyranny within. And this was an idea that Gandhiji and MLK also would like very much champion. This idea that you must be the change that you wish to see in the world. And there's a deep metaphysic to this. Once you change the person you are, because the world is nothing but an appearance in you of you, the world that you're trying to change also will automatically change. It's an idealistic claim, actually. The world is not as real as you think. What you're seeing, in a sense, you're putting. Like you're seeing through a particular lens, the lens that it would be profitable for certain companies for you to see through, obviously. Not to go all Alex Jones on you right now. Alex Jones, what was his name? Some conspiracy that, not to make a conspiracy theory out of this. I'm just saying, like, what we see might not be what's there. And we all know what it's like to project. It's a basic psychological fact. It's not like there's some Illuminati or something through their media narratives forcing you to do this. Maybe there is. I don't know. I don't care. But I mostly care about how I feel inside and why it is that I'm not able to take responsibility for that and take control of that. So be the change you want to see in the world is a deep teaching. It doesn't just mean, oh, be a role model unto others. It means the world itself might transform. Being as it is nothing other than an appearance in you of you once you change. So, having said all that, the call that we get in Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God, is to attain spiritual realization. We have to become spiritually realized by virtue of becoming children of God in order to be able to make peace. And blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. So, how do we find a guru? This is the idea, you know. In the Tantras, we say guru is very important. Without a guru, it's very difficult to actually make progress in spiritual life. But how do we get a human teacher, a guru? Again, like I said in that Who Can Be a Tantric Guru lecture, we talked about it's a wonderful question, Gretchen, a most important question. And last time we talked about the Abhishekams, you know how in Abhinava Gupta's Tantra Loka, there are all these different dikshas. There's a Samaya Diksha, and then there's the Sadhaka Diksha and the Putraka Diksha, you know, but there's also importantly the Acharya Abhishekam, where a person is consecrated to become a teacher. So in the tantric tradition, only your teacher can sign off on you becoming a teacher. And when you become a teacher, you only teach what they taught. And they're only teaching what their teacher taught. And their teacher's only teaching what their teacher taught. So the parampara has a kind of internal check and balance system to prevent idiosyncratic cults of personality. But still to offer a human mentor and a human guide, which is invariably important in spiritual life. That being said, though, how do we find a guru and how do we judge a guru to be correct? Like, all of these are very important discussions. And like I said, the true teachers, arguably the only teachers, are the incarnations: Buddha, Jesus, Rama, Krishna. They are God in human form. So the teachers of authority arguably are going to be people who are teaching them. Those who teach Krishna, Rama, Buddha, Chaitanya, those who teach the teaching of the Avatara, they're probably going to be the most effective teachers because the only true teachers are those avatars, right? That isn't to say that if a person isn't using the name of Rama, Krishna, Chaitanya, Buddha, they're therefore illegitimate. No, obviously I'm not saying that. But you'll find that what they say will tally with what those people said. And if it doesn't, usually because those people stress renunciation a lot, and our modern teachers are kind of afraid of the word because renunciation doesn't sell. Sex sells. So, unfortunately, when you want to make a consumer capitalist show of spirituality, you might depart from the messages of the avatars. The avatars were very clear about renunciation and very, very strongly emphasized it. You can't quite have spirituality without that. And so, if you want that level of spirituality, you have to go to that level of teacher. So the teachers who teach in the name of Krishna, Rama, Chaitanya, Jesus, Buddha, Shankara, like these are teachers, and those who teach in the name of Ramakrishna, they're trying to just present Ramakrishna. So arguably, even when we find such a teacher, we still think Ramakrishna is the guru or Jesus is the guru, like that. So that's an important point. So where is the guru? In the Bible as Christ, in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna as Ramakrishna. But the human teacher is also important, right? So we should never go to a guru unless we feel the need for a guru. Mhm. How do we feel the need for a guru? In other words, so you don't need a driving instructor. Nobody needs a driving instructor. But those who want to drive will probably be compelled to seek one. Don't you think that's just fair? Like, a person who wants to drive a car and get on the road will probably go to a driving school. And probably they're not going to learn from a book. I mean, they will. The books will be important. But they're probably mostly going to want to get into a car with an actual human being. Maybe their mom or brother or somebody, like somebody in the family, but most likely like a human, right, of some sort, whether related or not related. And that human will teach us. But you don't seek one out until the need to drive arises in you. So you don't need a guru until you need a guru. And until you need a guru, don't need to talk about guru. Right? It's not for us. If the discussion about the guru doesn't appeal to us, let's not talk about the guru. Who cares? We don't need a guru until we need a guru. But why do we need a guru? For the same reason why we seek out a driving instructor, because we really want to drive. In other words, we want to drive the body and mind to get to God. We feel a spiritual need, which brings me to some other beatitudes, which I like to share with you now. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. So these two, I think, are saying the same thing in slightly different ways. We don't want to drive until we feel the need for driving. We don't want God until we feel God's lack in the heart. Just notice that. Until you feel poor in spirit, you might be abundant in material things. You might have all the money in the world and all the fame. But if you feel inside you're lacking something, if something is missing from your life, if you feel poor in spirit, only then you'll seek out a guru, no? And if you are poor in spirit, you'll mourn. You'll mourn that your heart is not filled, especially if you are abundant in the world. From the world's point of view, you can have every possible thing and yet you will still mourn because it will never fully satisfy you. The eyes are not filled from seeing, the ears are not filled from hearing. So the pain that we feel inside is sometimes exacerbated when outwardly it seems like there's no reason to cry. So why are we crying in the limousine? It's almost like we have to be like, oh my God, you know, I have everything, and why am I not happy? Why are the eyes not fulfilled by seeing? Why are the ears not fulfilled by hearing? What's missing? When you feel that lack inside, that's called Shaktipata. So in the Tantric tradition, the quest for a guru and arguably the quest for spiritual life is God turning in towards herself. First, Shiva opens his eyes, and when he opens his eyes, he projects the world into existence. And as long as he's projecting the world into existence, Shiva eva gritva pashubhavaha. He takes on the role of a bound soul and forgets all about his Shiva nature. Not actually, but apparently. So apparently Shiva forgets about his Shiva nature and he's quite content to pursue the things of this world from birth to birth to birth. And that's fine, that's part of it. But then something happens. Somewhere along the way, he recognizes that poverty of spirit, even in the midst of abundance of material. So in that poorness, he mourns. Shiva suddenly feels this inward call to himself, actually. So it's God turning back towards God. It's now Shiva closing his eyes again. So from this Unmesha comes a Nimesha of the world. And through a Nimesha of the world comes an Unmesha of consciousness. That's the first stage in spiritual life. This turning back or this turning within, which is the first step to renunciation, actually. The recognition that something is missing. And that recognition doesn't come until we've played in the world for a long time. So the first thing we have to say is, have at it. Right? Like spiritual life cannot happen until one has had their fill of life in the world. One has to really play and go here and go there and try this and really try to see and then realize that the eyes are not filled by seeing. Really try to hear and find that the ears are not filled by hearing. After doing all of this, after exhausting ourselves from birth after birth playing the game, then comes this poverty and spirit. And blessed is the person who feels that. Blessed is the person who feels poor in spirit. Blessed is the person who mourns. Because the one who feels poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Remember, the kingdom of heaven is enlightenment, which is the recognition of God in the heart as the heart, which is the experience of God in this world, the transformation of samsara into nirvana. That's the kingdom of heaven. It's never going to come until we first want it. And how do we come to want it? Through anugraha. In other words, shaktipata, through grace. And that grace is almost always felt as a poignant, tragic heartbreak. Almost always. Not always. Sometimes it's felt differently, but many people feel it like a desire, a need. And it's a spiritual need. We hunger and thirst after righteousness, if you will. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And interestingly, the Christ starts with this. He starts with this because he wants to offer the kingdom of heaven. And he looks at the crowd, arguably those people gathered around him, and he realizes that they're coming to him because they want something. They want spiritual nourishment. They've recognized the poor in spirit. So don't you think this is him addressing the crowd who stands before him? These are literally the first words that come out of his mouth when he's there at the mountain about to give his sermon. So he says, blessed are the poor in spirit. In other words, blessed are all of you. You are seekers. A spiritual seeker, a sadhaka, a sadhvi, an aspirant, is someone who recognizes the lack within and is therefore moved to try to address it through approaching a guru. So until we feel the lack within, we wouldn't even find ourselves in that congregation. We wouldn't even go to the Christ for teaching. So blessed art thou, the poor in spirit, the seekers, for thine will be the kingdom of heaven. And then he says, it's good that you mourn. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. So this is the Christ's role as the one who gives rest to those who are heavily laden and burdened. And I want to jump ahead to those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they will be filled. So I just want to put all of this together. Those who are poor in spirit, those who mourn, and those who are hungered and thirsting. These are the spiritual seekers. So it's great. They will inherit the kingdom of heaven. They will be comforted and they will be filled. So the goal is to inherit the kingdom of heaven in order to be comforted and to be filled. So I'm going to put all of those together as the ends, and we'll say first being hungry and thirsty, being poor, recognizing your poverty in spirit, and recognizing how it makes you feel, that mourning that comes from that. That's very good. All these things, you can put them in one idea, which is the idea of Shaktipata, the awakening of the spiritual urge. Then finally we go to the child of God, who is the peacemaker, who is the Christ. And what do? We fall at their feet. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, water never gathers in a high place. It never gathers at the top of the mountain. It gathers in a valley. So water always pools in a lowly place. Now, when one approaches the guru with haughtiness, with hubris and with pride, there's very little the guru can do. In the Zen tradition, there is a proverb of what do you call it? Pouring the water into a full cup. You can't really pour any water into a full cup. A cup which is full of its own ideas will never learn anything new. So you must first empty your cup. So when you come to the teacher, you must come as an empty cup. Only then you can be filled. So I'm going to interpret this word meek, not in the sense of being disempowered, but in the sense of being in a state of reverence and awe before your guru. Only a powerful person knows what true humility is like. Humility is not cowardice, it's not weakness. It's not feeling sorry for yourself or groveling before someone like some disempowered person. Only a powerful person who recognizes the futility of knowledge and the futility of strength and the futility of wealth, only such a person is ready to supplicate themselves before the guru. And that is a condition for the guru's grace. Until the ego be thoroughly threshed, it's very difficult actually to gain the guru's grace. So therefore now I want to jump ahead because there's a very beautiful line. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So, of course, this is Christ consoling his apostles, who are all going to be horrifically persecuted for preaching the message of the Christ, which is obviously against the cultural milieu of the time. But also, he's kind of foreshadowing what's going to happen to him. He's going to be crucified in the name of God for righteousness. Because of righteousness, he will be persecuted. And he's saying, like, it's fine. You're blessed when people insult you. You're blessed when people persecute you. And you're blessed when people falsely say all kinds of evil against you. And he says, because of me. You can take this in two ways. One, you can understand it in this way. When you represent the Christ, in other words, when you try to live for truth, if you try to live an upright spiritual life, you're in trouble. People are going to criticize you. And you can never satisfy them. And there's a wonderful story that Swami Prabhavananda offers in the Sermon on the Mount according to Vedanta. There was a monk, a young monk, who was taking a nap under a tree, and he had like a brick for a pillow. And he was sleeping on the brick. And these two ladies walked by on their way to the river, and they started gossiping. And one said to the other within earshot, "Look at this monk. What kind of monk is he? He can't even do away with the luxury of a pillow. That's what renunciation looks like." And they laugh and they walk away. And the monk, he's obviously stung by this. Look, he's not in the Ritz-Carlton, right? He's just like under a tree, and he's got his head on a brick, for crying out loud. It's not even a soft mound of grass. It's a brick. And he just wanted to elevate his head so he could take a nap. Now, the stunning thing about this is he thought the ladies were right. He was stung, he listened, and he thought, oh, you know what? Yeah, I should renounce the brick actually. This is yeah, it's a luxury. So he got rid of the brick and then he laid down. Then the two ladies came back from the river, and then you know what they said? They pointed at him and laughed and said, "Look at this monk. Is he so susceptible to the words of others? We made fun of his brick. Now he's thrown the brick away. What kind of a monk is this who cares so much for the opinions of others?" You see, he can't win. And there's another story here. A father and a child were making a long journey and they had a donkey. So first the father put the child on the donkey and he went along with the donkey. Then people started to jeer and laugh at him in the first village they passed through. They were like, "Look at this stupid man. The child is on the donkey and he has to walk. What kind of an ingrate child is that? Does he have no respect for has he no respect for the father, making his poor old father walk while he sits like a prince on the donkey? And is this father such a bad parent that he didn't discipline his child and teach his child to be a reverent young one?" And so then the father was like, "Oh my God." So they switched roles. The father then got on the donkey, being the older one, and he had the child, the young boy, walk. When they got to the next village, everyone started jeering and making fun of them. "Look at this father. What? This is child abuse. He forces his young child to walk while he himself sits like a prince on the donkey." And the father thought, "Oh my God, they're right." So he got off of the donkey, and now both the father and child were walking. Nobody sat on the donkey. And when they got to the third town, everyone started jeering and saying, "What idiots! They have a donkey, yet neither of them will sit on the donkey and ride." You can't win. And really, once anybody tries to teach spirituality in the world or presents themselves as a spiritual person, it invites the projections and judgments of everyone else. Sometimes people have a good time in this house, in that they're just talking and laughing, and people come here and they're triggered by that. They're like, "Wait, this looks like a party more than a puja." And so then there's a feeling of like, well, that's not appropriate. Spiritual joy and like this kind of joy are like different things. Then they'll criticize. They'll say, this is not appropriate, it's not reverent, it's not a sanctified space now. It's like just a college dorm room party. And then the obverse can happen. You try to be as serious as possible and you have a puja and you sit and meditate for 2 hours, and then everyone says, oh, it was boring, it was kind of stodgy, it was not very accessible. So you just can't win, you see. And that's good. That's good, actually. It's good. Because everything we do, we're going to face resistance. Everything we say, there's going to be somebody who speaks against us. Thank God for that, because this will thresh us free of the ego. So there's a beautiful Khalil Gibran line where it's like, if you refuse to enter into love's threshing floor, it's like if you play it safe, then you won't cry all your tears, you won't laugh all your laughter. In other words, your heart won't be broken. And if your heart is not broken, the treasure won't come out. So Rumi once said, in Coleman Barks' translation, love came and took away my prayer beads and left me song and dance. It's a beautiful idea that until the heart breaks, there is no spirituality. Because until the heart breaks, we won't feel poor in spirit, we won't mourn, we won't hunger and thirst after righteousness, and we won't become meek. There's no way to approach the Guru if we're full of the pride of this world. So thank God that people persecute us. And they always will, everywhere in the world, no matter who we are, because that helps us overcome our spiritual ego. That's where Kali comes in. Kali is the greatest spiritualizing force in that she represents the divinization of all things that the mind rejects as bad. Spiritually, they're good. When your house burns down, when you fall ill, when you lose loved ones, when you're disappointed in your relationship, when you feel lonely, when you lose your fortune, when you gain a fortune only to find that it doesn't satisfy you, and most of all, when people persecute you. And Kristen, you're so right. We can't grow without gravity. And the idea is that that gravity that pulls us down first breaks us. And that's the idea. Blessed are those who persecute you. Because if it weren't for them, you wouldn't attain the kingdom of heaven. You wouldn't develop the meekness to be able to fall before your guru and receive what the guru has to give. So blessed are those who persecute you also. But yeah, blessed are those who are persecuted. So I'd like to say, without the persecutor, there wouldn't be the persecuted. So blessed is the persecutor. Do you see? This is a Ma Kali kind of attitude. Blessed is the one whose head is chopped, and blessed is the one who wields the sword. In both instances, oppressed or oppressed, how good, how glorious. Because if it wasn't for the oppressor, if it wasn't for the persecutor, if it wasn't for the Romans throwing us to the tigers and immolating us on stakes and crucifying us at the cross, then where would be the martyrs? Where would be the Christ? Where would be the spiritually great? So thank you to all those things we say that destroy us, that defeat us. So we enter into love's threshing floor, to use Khalil Gibran's beautiful turn of phrase. So that's why we look at Mother Kali and we say, do what thou wilt. Do what you must. And you must do every possible thing in order to free me from my limited sense of who I think I am. So blessed are those who persecuted me, and blessed am I to be persecuted. Blessed am I to be insulted. Blessed am I to be falsely accused of evil. Because without these things, I wouldn't grow. So like, why do I complain about them then? Why do I say, oh my God, I wish it weren't so. I wish people weren't saying all of these things. Hare, they will always say what they're going to say. There will always be haters. And that's why great rappers, they use it as fuel. Thank God for the haters. Otherwise, Kanye would have like 80% less music if he didn't have haters to respond to. So we have to be thankful, actually. And so now going back to the Pashupatas, this is very interesting. This parallel is very interesting. The Pashupatas, this early Shaiva movement, like Shaiva dualism, they were actively incurring the wrath of society. They would cover themselves in like excrement and then go out into society and like act the fool. And this tradition was there in Christianity too. It was called the Fools for Christ. And so they would go out and they would bray like donkeys and walk on all fours, and they would purposefully try to get people to spit on them and to kick them and to insult them. And so the Pashupatas, they thought that anytime somebody did something bad to them, it helped free them of some bad karma. So they were, of course, going off of the Vedic karma theory. So anytime something bad happens to you, it's like bad karma is being burnt off. Bless the person who comes to do that for you. That's one idea. And anytime like arguably good karma happens, good things happen, that's like good karma being spent. So it's actually really good that bad things happen because they have to happen. So the Pashupatas, they would actually meaningfully and voluntarily go out and like act the fool. So people would kick them and spit at them and shout at them. Now, you don't actually have to do this. Just live your life and people will do this. you know? What to say of live your life and live your life publicly and try to give spiritual teachings? Then surely people will do this, as has been my experience. So the bigger a community gets, the more the haters there will be naturally, the more the betrayal. And thank God for it. Bless them all. God bless them all. And to see how Swami Vivekananda himself responded to people in his life who betrayed him for money, and how compassionately he forgave them. And he said, I love you with an Indian love. Remember we read that letter some time ago? It's that Christ-like unconditional love where you may do whatever to me, you may say whatever to me, and I will love you. And part of why I love you is because you're helping me. So obviously this is Tiger God. You have to set your boundaries, but we shouldn't be upset that at times our boundaries were crossed. That means, of course, we'll need better boundaries. But just you wait. Those same boundaries, they might help us in those instances, but some new boundaries will be crossed. In other words, there will always be in this life chances to thresh the ego out of us. We say thank you. So that's the idea. The Pashupatas knew that and they voluntarily did it. We don't have to be so dramatic. We can just wait and live our lives and the same thing will happen. So that's one teaching from the ancient Tantric world, the Pashupata world, where they were like fools for Christ in order to free themselves of the ego. Sri Ramakrishna did sadhanas like this too. He cleaned the latrines of an untouchable with his Brahmin hair, with his jatta, and the hair is so intimate and so personal, and he used his hair to like clean the latrines in order to overcome his pride of being a Brahmin. So all these like dramatic tantric sadhanas, they can be helpful to overcome the ego. If you're a vegetarian, then eating some meat is helpful to shock you out of the pride of being a vegetarian. Stuff like that. So all these tantric sadhanas, we were trying to do them consciously, but now, life is itself a tantric sadhana because as we live in the world, Ma Kali will show up time and time again as that purifying force that shows us what is impermanent and immaterial and cannot bring lasting joy. So we think of all of this as Kali embodied. So I love these verses. Blessed are those who persecute you because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you. The teaching here is that we should rejoice and be glad. So I think that's one takeaway. And I'll stop here, I think. These could just be the Beatitudes. There's just so much, right? Like the salt and the light stuff, the fulfillment of the law. I mean, like we can jump ahead in how he said, do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Right? So that idea about how the Avatara doesn't overwrite the religion that came before. She restores the religion that came before. All of that. Now, we've had many lectures on the avatars, obviously. We've talked about how avatars are actually an incarnation of Kali, since it's Shakti alone who has the manifesting power to become Jesus. So I've made the claim that Jesus is a goddess, actually. And we've had many conversations on Mary of Magdala and the Shakti of Christ and all of that. So I think by now, most of you in this room, quite hip to the tantric avatarvad, a doctrine of the avatar from the point of view of Tantra. They're all manifestations of Shakti. So I don't need to get into it now. I just want to say that the purpose of Shakti is mother-like. She includes, doesn't reject. So it's manifestly un-Christian. It's manifestly un-Krishna-like to try to reject things and to say that they are wrong. Because the Christ doesn't come to abolish. In other words, he doesn't come to overwrite Judaism. He doesn't come to get rid of what came before. He's not starting a new religion. Therefore, the word Buddhism and the word Christianity are, in my opinion, quite problematic. The followers of the Christ are followers of religion, not necessarily of any ism or anity. Because anity is usually the end of the word insanity, so Christianity, more like Christian insanity. Or Buddhism, what kind of ism is that? More like schism, right? So Buddhism sounds like a cult. The cult of this one guy named Buddha. And Christianity also sounds like a cult. The cult of this one guy named Christ, sorry. And ISKCON sounds like a cult because it's all about Krishna. And dare I say, like, I pray we never become a Ramakrishna cult. That's why Swamiji was very careful about that. He said, never regard the teachings of Ramakrishna as a gospel unto itself. It's merely a commentary on the eternal Veda, as indeed the Bhagavad Gītā is itself a commentary on the eternal Veda. So in other words, think of Krishna, Christ, Buddha, Chaitanya as commentators on eternal religion. Don't become a Christian or a Buddhist or a Hindu. Just practice religion. And all of these teachers are saying the same thing. So the point here is to say that the Avatara themselves is an incarnation of God, and since God is in the tantric sense Kali, and Kali is a mother, mothers are always inclusive. So therefore he comes not to break but to fulfill. So if you're a good Christian, you could still be a Buddhist or a Hindu or whatever. Like if you learn what the Christ has to say in the Sermon of the Mount, it will not break what you do, but fulfill. Anyway, that's another aspect. There's like so much, you guys. Like we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, and I think we will. So we'll come back to it. We'll come back to the Sermon on the Mount. I just want to close with the Beatitudes. This would be like the Tantric Sermon on the Mount, part 1, I guess you could say, just on the Beatitudes. And so we'll finish with this. It's wonderful that these things happen. What do we do though, right? When people are like this to us, and they will be. And it's not just people, it's also circumstances in our life. it's not just that people are going to criticize us, it's also like we're going to get ill. Yeah, Christian. It's also like we're going to lose a fortune and make a fortune, and things are not going to go our way. Sometimes it's impersonal, it's just the weather, maybe, right? So when these things happen, we should rejoice and be glad. Oh, I'll tell you something. Also in the Panchadashi by Vidyaranya Swami, there's a beautiful line. He says, I should be happy when people insult me because they are made happy by insulting me, and I've received good karma by doing some good to others for like just being me, something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but the idea is like if somebody can be made happy by criticizing you, good, let them be happy. Why begrudge them their happiness? But you also be happy. If somebody is mean to you, if something bad happens, if you're being persecuted, rejoice and be glad because they're helping finish off your karmas. And now, Christ gives us perhaps one of the most important attitudes to have in life. And I want to explain it from a tantric point of view. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. Now, if you do not have mercy for your oppressors, by the way, it's the oppressors and the aggressors who need mercy. It's our enemies who need mercy. It's like in Game of Thrones, Tyrion Lannister, he says, we only make peace with our enemies. Oh, somebody said it to him. We only make peace with our enemies. He's like, he doesn't want to like talk to them. And he's like, but they're my enemies. And he's like, oh, I think he says it, right? It's like, we only make peace with our enemies. And then Daenerys repeats it. She's like, as a wise man once said, yeah, it was Tyrion. As a wise man once said, we call it making peace because we only make peace with our enemies. So we like to forgive people who haven't wronged us, but the people who have wronged us or the people who are wronging the world, they are the ones that are deserving of mercy. Can we see the aggressor as the aggressor as the one to whom aggression is given? Can we see the oppressor as the oppressed? In other words, isn't the bully themselves being beaten at home by their parents? And aren't their parents themselves bullied by their parents? The thing to remember is that every bully in the world is bullied. If they weren't bullied, they wouldn't be bullying. So have mercy. See that they are actually the ones who need our love, you know? Not the victims. Obviously, the victims need our love. The aggressor, the oppressor needs our love. So if you want to be Christ-like, love your enemies. You know, love the ones who hate you and persecute you and oppress you. It's really not so easy to do. But at least we can do this. Have some mercy in the sense that we understand why they're doing what they're doing. Doesn't mean we excuse them, but we forgive them. You know, and by forgiving them, why is that helpful? Christ says, blessed are those who are merciful. If you forgive someone, it's good because you will be forgiven. In other words, you will be shown mercy. And here's how it works immediately. Until you forgive someone, you are punishing yourself for what they did. They did something and you continue to suffer it. But once you forgive them, your heart is peaceful. You're done. It's all been laid to rest. In other words, you've been forgiven. By forgiving them, you've been forgiven. By showing mercy, mercy has been shown unto you. The peace and joy and blessedness that comes from forgiveness is probably what is meant by that line, for mercy will be showed unto you. But you only on the condition that you're able to show mercy unto others. And part of how to show mercy unto others is to remember that teaching. Rejoice and be glad for those who persecute you. They're doing you a great favor, actually. And so therefore you can be merciful towards them because they're mother embodied, mother come to put you in your place, something like that. So I'm putting this all together. We have a pretty tantric teaching, right? We live our life, we get persecuted and insulted and falsely accused. And through that, we become aware of how poor we are in spirit. We start to mourn, we start to feel hunger and thirst for righteousness. Through that, we seek out the peacemaker who is called a child of God. And then we fall at her feet, meek, ready to inherit the earth. And now comes the key teaching. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. I want to close with this. This is perhaps the most important thing that we can take away from the Beatitudes. I'm just thinking about how much there is to this and how much we've been able to talk about just from these Beatitudes and how much more we can still talk about based on just these Beatitudes. But I want to say this final thing. And this is the most important thing. And for this, you can refer to the lecture that we gave last week called Christ as a Solar Deity. So in case I don't get to say as much about it now as I want, I've already said a bit about it last time in that lecture called Christ as a Solar Deity. So we talked about the Christ's most important innovation in Jewish spirituality. What was it? It was making God, who previously seemed like a righteous king at best, but at worst, a capricious tyrant, right? Making that awe-inspiring God appear to be nearer and dearer than one's own father. He is your father. The idea that God is not just a king, God is a father, and your father at that. That was the Christ's unique innovation in his cultural climate. Remember, the people in that time were afraid of God. They had been taught to fear God. To them, God was this inscrutable, amorphous abstract sky daddy with a naughty or nice list, willing to punish you for the slightest transgression of his inscrutable law. God was someone you entered a covenant with. He was a deal maker and like a capricious tyrant who was ready to smite you should you stray from those agreements. That's a very scary way to look upon God. And naturally, that tradition didn't like to think about God. It defaulted to rules. There was no deep, intimate, personal connection with God. There was no feeling there. And so the Christ came and he said, no, God is your very own. You know the beautiful song? Tvameva mata cha pita tvameva tvameva bandhu cha saka tvameva. You know that beautiful song? Tvameva sarvam mama deva deva. Beautiful song. It's like, you are my all. You are my all in all. You are my God of gods. You are verily my mother. Tvameva mata cha and pita tvameva, and you are my father. Tvameva bandhu, you are my friend. Chasaka tvameva, you are my nearest and dearest. That's a song that every Hindu knows. Because God is our mother, God is our father, God is our brother, God is our sister, God is our lover, God is our child. All these divine relationships. The Bhakti Yoga tradition is premised on cultivating a relationship with God. Seeing God as your parent is one attitude. But you can also see God as your child. And Christians do this when they regard Christ as baby Jesus. And Hindus do this when they regard Krishna as baby Krishna. We talked about that last week in the Vatsalya Bhava lecture. Then regarding God as one's friend. Christ himself said, I call you my friends. Right? Christ also encouraged that bhava to be buddy-buddy, to be Christ's pal, if you will. Then there's also the attitude of being Christ's servant, dasya bhava. Seeing Christ as the master and feeling like a servant. That's how Christ relates to God sometimes. He feels like he's doing God's work. God is the master and he is the faithful servant carrying out his Father's plan. Thy will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. I'm ready to fulfill it, to do whatever you need me to do to serve you. So that dasya bhava is there, like we see with Hanuman serving Rama. But you know, what Christ emphasized most, of course, the friend bhava, the child bhava, the servant's bhava, all bhava means attitude, they're there. But what he emphasized most is parent bhava. Because you know, when God is your child, you take care of God. That's a very exalted mood. But when God is your parent, God takes care of you. Remember what Kali said to Vivekananda? Are you taking care of me or am I taking care of you? There's a lot of comfort in that. To think that God is not just some tyrannical ruler in the sky with rules. God is your very own parent who is nurturing you. Will not the person who created the sun and moon also awaken in your heart love? Like, will not the ultimate power of the universe powerfully protect you? That's the idea, to feel that God is your very own father. That was the Christ's central emphasis, developing a relationship with God. And what does that do? It purifies us. So we become pure in heart when we bring God into the heart, make way in the wilderness for the coming of the Lord. That coming of the Lord into the heart is the establishing of a relationship with the Lord. That's what sadhana is. Sadhana, spiritual practice, every day when you do your daily pujas. Sometimes they're 5 minutes, sometimes they're 15, sometimes they're 5 hours. When you do daily puja, all you're doing is allowing the mind to flow to your chosen ideal, whether it's Kali or Krishna or Jesus, uninterruptedly for a period of time, which develops the relationship that you have with her. When you say japa, when you repeat the holy name of God, something that Swami Prabhavananda really emphasizes in Sermon on the Mount according to Vedanta, you cultivate a relationship with God by lovingly repeating her name, by meditating on her leelas, her dhyana, leela dhyanam, by meditating on her rupa dhyan. These are all the things that go into tantric spiritual practice. All you're really doing is you're cultivating a relationship with God. And through that sadhana, Swami Prabhavananda makes this very important point, you will develop sattva. So now I'm bringing in the theory of the gunas from Sankhya. A lot of Tantra is premised on these three guna ideas, right? So the tamo guna is inertia, and when we feel depressed, it's when the tamo guna is very heavy in us. A preponderance of tamo guna makes us feel depressed and heavy. Rajoguna means dynamism, and when we feel restless and aggravated, that's because of a preponderance of rajaguna. Most of us are tamasic and rajasic. So we're rajasic when we're ambitious and aggravated. We're tamasic when we're suffering the hangover from that. So life is rajas and tamas, actually. Rajas and tamas predominate in our mind. But then through spiritual practice, a third quality is developed. It's always there. And from time to time in nature, when we listen to bird song, when we rest in between words, in between breaths, we feel it. But it's very dim and very sparse in our life. But through spiritual practice, and here's the guarantee. Swami Vivekananda said cheerfulness is the first sign of spiritual life. Why? Because as you do spiritual practices, japa, puja, as you cultivate a relationship with God, mark my words, they're not my words, they're Vivekananda's words, mark his words, you will feel more and more cheerful. It's just a scientific fact from the point of view of the Sankhyan Guna idea. When you do spiritual practices, the Sattva Guna will increase in you. And that allows you to be merciful, to forgive. That allows you to rejoice when those who insult you and persecute you and falsely accuse you come before you. You cannot rejoice, you cannot forgive, you cannot be merciful, you cannot even be humble without Sattva Guna. So how do you get Sattva? Through spiritual practices. That's the idea of Tantra, is to emphasize practice. Don't just wait around for God to do it. Going back to the Buddha's idea of self-effort. Do something, Baba. Go to your guru, get a mantra, and repeat that mantra. Repeat that mantra like your life depends on it, because it fucking does, right? It does. Our entire life depends upon the cultivation of sattva, and through sattva, the realization of God. So chant that mantra like you mean it, with white hot knuckles. May your mala run hot. Chant that. Like, why complain and mourn? And you have the mantra. Chant the mantra. When you're desperate, chant the mantra. When you feel that hunger and thirst for righteousness, chant the mantra. Do the puja. Be up and doing always, especially in the beginning of spiritual life. Don't take things for granted. Don't waste time. There's only so many hours in the day. So much of that is spent sleeping. Do not gossip. Do not dilly-dally. Do not read so many books such that you don't actually get to practicing. The books are good if they inspire you to practice. But hare, practice, practice, practice. That's what it means to become pure. Through practicing, one purifies himself, because through practicing, one develops sattva, and it's that sattva which we call purity. And that sattva, importantly, means cheerfulness. It means joy. So how do you know a pure person? They're happy, actually. It's not about what you eat. That's another point of the Tantra. Abhinavagupta in chapter 4 brings this up. There is no inherent impurity in any activity or food. Sri Ramakrishna said, blessed is the one who eats pork, who thinks of God. It's a beatitude. Sri Ramakrishna's beatitude. Blessed is the one who eats pork, whose mind is constantly in God. And wretched is he, the opposite of a beatitude, who eats the purest vegetarian foods, but who daily is thinking of sensual pleasures and money and power. So the idea is that a worldly person eating spiritual food, wearing spiritual clothes, going to the temple, that just won't do. That's hypocrisy. And later on in the teaching, Christ says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand even know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. See the importance of secrecy in spiritual life. It creates sacredness. And then there's a beautiful teaching about fasting. Oh my God, that one is just, when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So there are a lot of teachings about secrecy. Oh my God, like that will take us into a whole other world. Ruth Devi knows, because when we started our San Francisco retreat last month, or 2 months ago actually, it was the February, yes, we opened with why Tantra is secret. Why is it Guhya? Why is it Vidya? And I told you, because that which is sacred is secret. That which is intimate is kept private. So your spiritual life is a private affair between you and God, a heated romance between this soul and God's soul. And like that romance is sacred, because it's secret because it's sacred. So secrecy is important. But notice, do not disfigure your faces, because a sad, gloomy face is not a spiritual face. A face full of joy is a spiritual face. Therefore, a lot of people eat vegetarian foods. They wear nice clothes. They make a show of sattva, but inside it's all tamas and rajas. Other people eat pork, eat beef. I say eat beef. Why not? Eat whatever you want, because there is no inherent impurity in food. I'm a Hindu saying to you now, eat beef. Who cares? It has nothing to do with your spirituality. Eating beef or not eating beef has nothing to do with your spirituality. But often we make spirituality all about food, and then we use food to like kind of make others feel bad. And then our religion has gone to the kitchens. It's gone to the dogs. They say it's gone to the dogs. No, it's gone to the kitchens. Vivekananda would say Vedanta is like a kitchen religion now. It's gone to your cooking pots. Don't think about food. Eat whatever you need to eat to feel strong. Sattva is not in food, it's in thought. Now that isn't to say ahara doesn't affect your thoughts. What you eat will affect your thoughts. Obviously, if you eat animal meats, that might have a certain effect on you. Maybe, I don't know. But it's different for different people, right? Therefore, we have to find a diet that works for us and never fall into the trap of thinking that impurity in here is in food. There is no impurity in food. There is no impurity in acts. The impurity is in the mind, which grasps at worldliness, attachment, and whatnot. Purity is called sattva. Impurity is called rajas and tamas. If there is such a thing as purity, it's just a preponderance of sattva in the mind. And what does it look like? It doesn't look like a particular diet or a hygiene program or a lifestyle. It looks like joy, Baba. It looks like cheerfulness. A face that is full of joy. And it can't be faked. The sattva, when a person has a lot of sattva, their face will shine. And that shining, that joy is what is called purity. So I'm going to give you one more definition of purity from Swami Prabhavananda. Purity is the ability to focus your mind. Through sattva comes focus. Without sattva, through rajas and tamas, the mind either becomes scattered, as in the case of rajas, or it becomes dull, as in the case of tamas. So if you sit down to meditate and you're full of rajas, you won't be able to focus. You'll become agitated and you will want to get off your mat and go do something else. And if you're full of tamas, you'll fall asleep. So the tamasic cannot meditate and the rajasic cannot meditate. A lot of us struggle at meditation because we don't have sattva. Puja, japa, all of these practices, these observances, vratas, they're called, all the things that we do in Tantra, homa, puja, japa, vrata, yoga, whatever we do in Tantra is just meant to cultivate sattva. And through that sattva, real spirituality is possible because finally the mind is able to fix itself on the ideal. So how do you know when you're pure? When you're able to think of God uninterruptedly is when you're pure. Because it's only through that sattva that you get that concentration. So unless the mind be made sattvic, it cannot be meditating. Unless it meditates and becomes single pointed on God, unless thine eye become single, thy body shall not be filled with light. That was the Christ promise. In another place he said, let thy eye be single, then thy body will be filled with light, or something like that. There's a yogic interpretation of that. It's only through single pointed devotion to God, renouncing everything else, that God vision comes. So purity means dispassion for the world. Because of sattva. Through rajas and tamas, we feel very attracted to the world, but through sattva, we become very attracted to God. So dispassion for the world and single-pointed devotion to God. Renounce everything for God. That feeling of renouncing everything for God, that's sattva. And that brings joy. It's ever-increasing, ever-renewing joy. Nityodita. So in puja, in japa, in kirtana, in bhajana, in all the various practices of Tantra, you're cultivating sattva. And you can watch your own spiritual progress by seeing how selfless you're becoming, how calm and peaceful and cheerful you're becoming, and also how single-pointed you're becoming. So blessed are the pure in heart, which means blessed are the people who do regular dogged sadhana, who cultivate sattva. Just be up and doing, and then sattva will come, and then we'll be pure in heart. And then the closing note, for one will see God. The one who is pure in heart will see God, which brings us to our final point, which is arguably the same point that we've given every single lecture on Christ. The thing that upsets me sometimes about Christianity is its emphasis on belief over experience, right? It's not about belief. Nobody ever did religion based on belief. Nobody. Every single person who did spirituality, who really sincerely did it based on experience. The Christ had an experience of God. Paul had an experience of Christ. Every single born-again Christian is a Christian because they had an experience. It's not about faith. It's about experience. You see, and that experience is the direct, immediate, tangible presence of God. So blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. You can never prove God to a person full of rajas and tamas. You can't convince an atheist to believe in God. The fact is they simply don't feel God's presence. And to feel God's presence requires a lot of sattva. So Christ gives the most important promise, the Tantrik promise. Because the Tantras say, until you realize God, we're not done. The purpose of Tantra is so that you can have a direct, immediate experience of God. So Christ says, the way, the means is to be pure. And we've described that as cultivating sattva through sadhana. And through that purity, because of that purity, as a result of that purity, one comes face to face with God. God is an experience, and that is the culmination of spiritual life. Swamiji said, unless I see God, I can't claim that there is God. If there is a God, he said, I must be able to see her. If there is a soul, I must be able to feel myself as that. So religion is not about faith. It's about experience. And through spiritual practice, one gets purity, and through purity, one gets experience. And I think we'll leave it at that. So those are the few elements, just a few elements of Tantra that we can derive from this Sermon on the Mount. And you can see Bhagavad Gītā can be read from a Tantric point of view. Right? Rama's discourse to Shabari can be read from a Tantric point of view. Or it can be read from Vaishnava, Shaiva, Shakta point of view. It can be read from a Vedantic point of view. You can read any of these texts in any particular way. That's the glory of these texts. Because they are the words of God, they come not to destroy, but to renew. So we are Tantric, so we've taken a Tantric view of things. But hopefully you can see that these principles of spirituality are not Tantric, nor are they Vedantic, nor are they Shaiva, nor are they Christian, nor are they Muslim. They're universal. And to arrive at these universal truths of spirituality, that has been the purpose and the glory of all the great avatars. So today, as a tribute to Pope Francis, who was such a shining light in the tradition, as a tribute to Christ, to Krishna, to Rama, to Buddha, and most of all to Sri Ramakrishna, my all in all, may this be an offering at his lotus feet. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu Shri Yesu Christam Arpanam Astu. Jai Shri Shri Bhagavan Isha Deva ki Jai. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj ki Jai. Jai Mary, Mata Mary, Mary Shakti ji ki Jai.